I got my notes here. I think we're good to go. All right, so before we actually get into the full discussion, I do want to take a minute to, I don't think apologize is the right word, but I do want to give notice that I feel like this discussion compared to previous discussions we've done in the past is going to be a little more bare bones. It's definitely going to be shorter than the previous two discussions we've done, but it's also, I feel like it'd be a little more bare bones because Bioshock 1 is... Bioshock 2 basically is Bioshock 1, the expansion. A lot of the stuff that we discussed in Bioshock 1, if we were to have the discussion for this same game as well, we would be repeating a lot of stuff. So it's going to feel a little bit more bare bones. I was doing some research and I couldn't really find anything that really stood out as something major to bring up in terms of game design that was unique to this game. And but I was trying to fill the pages with information. I realized I was basically it was almost similar to IMDb synopsis where I was kind of just listing off basic information for the games. So we definitely do have some stuff to talk about, but it might it's not going to be as engaging as the first two games. I also think that part of the issue, quote unquote issue, is that this is one of those games that is in the controversial category. It doesn't have outright good or outright bad things about it. It's not as polarizing in the good or the bad field. So besides the fact this is a sequel, that's basically expansion on a discussion we've already had, and it's a very middle of the road in terms of response by the public. There's just not going to be as much to discuss about this, or the discussion will be as in depth and as the previous discussions were. And also, while a lot of different companies will try to hide the magic behind closed doors, they don't like to reveal the trade secrets of how they develop their games as time goes on, or the decisions that they come to, or what the process is like Nintendo famously does. The Bioshock 1 dev team was very open and very public. They were very willing to go into discussions and talk about the process as the game was developed along, both during and after the release of the game. Whereas Bioshock 2, I don't think that they were necessarily trying to hide behind closed doors, but there was not as much public information to draw on for the discussion of Bioshock 2. And the last thing was, usually when I complete one of these games, the day after I take off from stream, and I spend that entire day just researching the game as much as I can to try to get like the big chunk of it out of the way. But I, for some reason, came away like finishing Bioshock 2 with not a full, complete understanding of the story or the motivations behind a lot of the characters in the game. So I spent the first like 4 to 5 hours of my day off just researching, like crawling through wikis, reading everyone's synopsis and what their goals were, what their motivations were, and just finally getting a full grasp and understanding of the story. And then once I finally got of the full breadth of what the game was trying to say, then I could finally start the actual researching into the game. So there was just a lot of different things that kind of led into this final result of this discussion. I think it's just a little bit more simplistic than we have for the previous two games. So this one's probably going to end up shorter. So with that out of the way, we can actually get into the discussion for the game. So we'll start off with the background info for the Bioshock IP. We touched on this in the first game, so we'll kind of just brush right through this really quickly. First Bioshock game came out August 21st, 2007. This is just named Bioshock. This is made by Irrational Games, who was turned into 2K Boston at the time of the development. And then Bioshock 2 came into development I think it was 3 months. It started 3 months after the release of Bioshock 1, and it was finally released February 9th, 2010. This game, Bioshock 2, was headed by 2K Marin, a new studio that was created by 2K. The original core group of people who started working on the team, I believe it was 9 people? It was 8 or 9 people was the core development team that started on Bioshock 2 originally, and a large chunk of it was made up by people who worked on Bioshock 1, and they eventually expanded to massive numbers. 2K Marin, that was just open for Bioshock 2, and the only other game that they had made was an XCOM spinoff called the Bureau XCOM that came out August 20, 2013, so 3 years after Bioshock. And then after the release of XCOM, the spinoff, about 2 or 3 months afterwards, in October, the vast majority of the staff was completely laid off. And then the studio silently closed 6 years later, just this past December, and it still actually has not been publicly acknowledged by 2K at all. So 2K was founded, developed the BioShock 2 game, made one other spin-off game, laid off almost the entire staff just a couple of months later, and left it as an empty building for about 6 years until they quietly shut down the studio. The only way that we know is other people have come forward and said it to different people who have written articles, games journalists who have written articles about it, but it's still not been publicly acknowledged by 2K. So after BioShock 2, then we have BioShock Infinite. BioShock Infinite came out in 2013, March 26th, and this was the game that Irrational Games came back and spearheaded the development for BioShock Infinite. Ken Levine returned, and that was the most recent BioShock game to be made. And there's currently a fourth BioShock game being made right now, and it's being developed by an entirely new studio called Cloud Chamber. The original Ken Levine, the original writer for BioShock 1 and BioShock Infinite, is not having any part from it. He's decided to take a step back from doing big, huge title, big budget games, that just massive projects that take a lot of time. So he will not be involved in that one either. But that's the general history of the BioShock IP up to this point. Like I said, we touched on it a lot more in the first BioShock discussion, which you could find the video on YouTube for that one, where I go much more in depth about the whole story and history of the BioShock IP and how it kind of developed and started. So we'll go on to the next subject, which is also incredibly short. Kind of just the idea of how BioShock 2 came to be. BioShock 2 was greenlit very shortly after the success of BioShock 1. BioShock 1 did very, very well, way better than expected in terms of critical success, as well as it did pretty good commercially. And so I believe it was 3 months after BioShock 1's release, they started work on BioShock 2. And very early into the discussion of the game, they decided that they were going to do another game set in Rapture. And this is where Ken Levine, the original writer and creative head for BioShock 1, decided to leave amicably, because he felt that he had said everything that really needed to be said inside Rapture. He liked the BioShock IP and wanted to continue the story of the IP, but he didn't want to continue the story in Rapture. So whereas other developers wanted to, other developers felt that there was a lot more that still needed to be said. There were stories that weren't told, information that could still be spread to the people, and he decided he didn't want to do that, so he left amicably. He would occasionally be phoned in for certain opinions and oversee points occasionally, but for the most part, Ken Levine was not really involved in the development of BioShock 2. And that's, again, very short, but that's pretty much where the story of BioShock 2 comes from. First one was very successful. 2K saw lots of money. They're like, let's make another one. They decided they wanted to do it in Rapture. The original writer didn't want to do it in Rapture. He wanted to do it somewhere else, so he left. Let the new studio take over for development of BioShock 2. And they made the game. I tried to research as much as I could about any kind of information about difficulties or anything with the development, any interesting stories about the development history of BioShock 2, but there really was not much to be found. So we'll just hop on over to this. This is actually was supposed to be, I'm really glad I did this, because this was originally just a topic I kind of lightly touched on for Metroid to show what Metroid was bringing to the table at the time of gaming when there wasn't much else of it. And now this is actually just a really fun thing I like to do, because I think it's cool to look back on history. Everyone likes to say that this was the best year of gaming and this year was empty and blah, 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 and this was crappy, but most years had some pretty major releases, and it's fun to kind of look back through, look back in time and look at these little windows in history and find out that there actually was a lot of good games that were released in pretty much any period of gaming, at least from what we've seen so far. So for BioShock 2 was released, I believe it was February, if I remember correctly. Yeah, February of 2010. So it's like right at the beginning of the year. So I basically took the 6 months before and the 6 months after to get like a full year scope of what was released around the time of BioShock's release. And there were some pretty good games. Pretty big games. So leading up to the release of BioShock 2, that I would consider and say are, kind of direct competitors, or something that the developers have to watch out for, or the publishers had to watch out for in terms of trying to stagger the release so it's not overwhelmed. But leading up to the release of BioShock 2, we actually had Halo 3 ODST. We had Uncharted 2, which I actually kind of briefly looked into because I was like, oh yeah, the Uncharted games, this is one of the older ones. I wonder if this one was well received. And I took a brief glance, and apparently Uncharted 2 is insanely good. Like, a lot of people put it on list of like one of the greatest video games of all time, which blew my mind. I had no idea that the Uncharted series was that well received. I thought it was kind of like a new recent thing where the most recent Uncharted games had come out and people had loved them so much. So that was really surprising. We had Uncharted 2 came out shortly before BioShock 2's release. We had the first Borderlands, which took the world by storm, basically the origin of the looter shooter. I don't know, this one sounded familiar, I couldn't quite place it, but Modern Warfare 2, apparently in the Call of Duty series, apparently that was a slight success, coming out shortly before the release of BioShock 2. We have Left 4 Dead 2. Also did not realize that came out in 2009. God, that game was so much older than I thought. And then we also had Mass Effect 2, which kind of, while Mass Effect 2 is definitely more of an RPG and more of a story type of thing, I also think that with people playing BioShock, they go for the atmosphere and they go for the story. So I felt like that could be considered somewhat of a competitor for BioShock. And then after the release of BioShock, we had Battlefield Bad Company 2 came out. We had Metro 2033, the first entry into the Metro series that has just grown exponentially more popular with each release, and Red Dead Redemption as well. So many shooters. It's kind of funny. I remember looking back at the this is drastically different than what we had for the Metroid Prime release schedule. Metroid Prime was a lot of platformers, and there were the occasional shooters, but not that much. And I'm looking at this list, and it's just so many huge big name shooters that were coming out. It's crazy. Things change in just a couple years. Yeah, it's a ton of shooters. The atmosphere makes the game. Atmosphere is wildly important, and BioShock was the game that really let people know that atmosphere is important for games. But it's also very important for shooters. A lot of people knew that atmosphere was important for games, but they always thought it was more meant for adventure games or RPGs. There wasn't really a whole lot of insane atmosphere that was put into many different shooters up until that point. Bigger camp. Yeah, I was going to try and adjust the layout a little bit more, but I didn't have as much time as I wanted to get the layout adjusted. Hopefully by next time it'll be a little bit better, but I can do that. So those are the games that I would consider more direct competitors to BioShock. In terms of games that were not direct competitors, but again, it's just fun to look at the huge releases that came out. So leading up to the release of BioShock 2, we had the Metroid Prime trilogy came out. We had Batman Arkham Asylum, the first game in the Batman series that also took the world by storm. And I think I might actually throw Batman Arkham Asylum onto that list of games because, I mean, I feel like just the combat system alone is so influential and has just appeared in so many different games. And I could be wrong that that type of combat style that they used for the Arkham series could have come in a game before then, but that definitely, without a doubt, is the game that popularized that type of combat style. But yeah, the first Arkham Asylum, the first Arkham game came out. Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story came out shortly before BioShock 2. We had Kingdom Hearts, the one with the fraction in it. I don't know how to say that title. I don't. Demon Souls was ported to the US. The beginning of the Souls series finally reached over and touched ground on US soil. We had New Super Mario Brothers Wii, Assassin's Creed 2, which Assassin's Creed 1 I think was 2007. I think Assassin's Creed 1 came out the same year as BioShock 1 came out. And then 2007 BioShock 1 came out and Assassin's Creed 1 came out, and then 2010 Assassin's Creed 2 and BioShock 2 came out, which I think is kind of funny. If I'm remembering that correctly. And then also Little Big Planet came out in very shortly before BioShock 2. And then after the release of BioShock 2, we had Bayonetta, the first entry in the Bayonetta series. And I was also very shocked to find out that VVVVVV came out in 2010. I absolutely thought that was an old style, really old retro game. I thought that was, you know, a game that came out in SNES days. I was absolutely shocked to find out that VVVVV is like a 10-year-old game. That's why I love doing this research, man. So cool. 358 days over 2. Okay. I'm sure there's some kind of explanation as to why it's called that, but I don't know it. And then after the release of BioShock, we had the first Dante's Inferno game came out. My favorite, everyone's favorite, the game that everyone raves about and always so excited to talk about in positive light. Final Fantasy 13 came out not too long after BioShock came out. We had Pokemon Heart Gold, the best Pokemon game that was released in the United States. God of War 3 came out. Skate 3, the last and final Skate game to ever be released before they completely buried the IP, never to be seen or heard from again. And then Super Mario Galaxy 2 also came out shortly following BioShock's 2 release. So it was a big year. 2009 to 2010, that the 6 months before and after, there was some big name stuff, man. That's a lot of big stuff. The Modern Warfare 2, Left 4 Dead 2, the first Borderlands, Uncharted 2, Red Dead Redemption, Metroid Prime Trilogy, the first Arkham game, Demon Souls reaching the US, Pokemon Heart Gold, Super Mario Galaxy 2. There was some huge releases in that window. And I wonder if that's why the sales of the game were what it were. Because we'll get into the sales of BioShock 2 later in the discussion. But, I mean, BioShock came out in February, which is kind of a weird time to release in because a lot of developers try to push out their games to get into the holiday season because that's what everyone's buying games. But you also have the fact that everyone's trying to push out their games around holiday season, so there's so much more competition to get your attention. So getting in a February release definitely has a little less, you have less to fight for on the shelves, space for people's eyes. But at the same time, one, people are not prone to spend more money around that time, but also a lot of people will have spent a ton of money in the few months before then on Christmas. So I do wonder, there's definitely some ups and downs to the February release, but there was a lot of competition for BioShock 2 to go up against. Direct competition in terms of, you know, similar type of player bases, but also just other games in general. I still think it is important to consider these other major releases, even if they're not direct competitors to BioShock. You know, Super Mario Galaxy is not at all a similar type of game or play style for Super Mario Galaxy 2, but for someone like me who does very much enjoy platformers and also shooters, you know, I love Super Mario Galaxy 2 and I love the BioShock series. I only have so much disposable income, so it's with so many major games coming out, I think that's also a very valid reason to bring up the other games that are coming out that are major releases that have other people's attention. So BioShock 2 had a lot to compete with shortly before and after the release of the game. It was a good time for games. According to the Kingdom Hearts lore, the 358, the title refers to the number of the days that Roxas was with organization. With two of his effective the two people? Oh my god, what a friggin' arbitrary, I don't know. What a ridiculous way to name. To Kill a Mockingbird. There's a lot of really important pieces of media that I really need to go and look at some point. Still haven't seen the Godfather movie. I want to read Atlas Shrugged now that we played BioShock 1, but Tiny's nervous because she's like, do you want to read a bunch of alt-right material? Do I have anything to worry about? I'm just curious. Not about the subject matter like it's going to change my life. I'm just curious because it's influential. No, I haven't seen The Godfather. I've only in the past year or so seen Goodfellas. There's a lot of important movies I haven't seen. There's a lot of important books I have not read. There's a lot of media I still need to consume. Very important things. I'm finally working on getting through the important video games. I mean, I still haven't played Half-Life, and I'll be getting to that soon. I've seen the original Alien, but I fell asleep because it's a long movie. Long movie. God, that movie's so long. and it is a slow burn. I think I was like 13 when I watched Alien 1, where I had much shorter attention span, and I wanted to watch it, and I did watch it, but I couldn't get all the way through it. I'm like, this is just such a long movie. I passed out. Have not seen Aliens, though, at all. I'm going to assume you forgot a word I meant to say. You haven't played Half-Life either. Jurassic Park 3 is my favorite Jurassic Park, and just like that, I lost all subs on YouTube and Twitch. All right, so that's also a typo. So we finally, let's fast forward a little bit to when we finally got the release of BioShock 2. It comes out, and the first thing to discuss is the changes that were made from the original BioShock 1, because that is definitely the biggest thing that BioShock 2 brought to the table. Was BioShock 1 was great and handles nicely, but it's very, I think the best way for me to compare it is like BioShock 1 is Paper Mario 64 and BioShock 2 is TTYD, where Paper Mario 64 is a fantastic game. I love it. It's great. And I have no problem playing it. But once I play the second one, going back to the first one just makes some of the issues and gameplay mechanics so much more clear. Where, you know, Paper Mario 1000 Year Door, they have the partner health compared to how it is in the first one, where your partner doesn't have health, but if they get hit, they're completely incapacitated for X amount of turns. I love the mechanic that they do in T2ID that way. It's the same thing with BioShock 2. I feel like if I were to go back and play BioShock 1 now, it would, in a way, kind of hamper the experience, because I know that down the line, they clean things up a lot and they make it better. And it kind of sucks having to go back to the more retro style gameplay that they did. So BioShock 2 cleaned up quite a bit when it came to mechanics in the game. So one of the first things that I noticed very quickly was the hacking minigame was completely redone in BioShock 2. And I was someone who was like, I had no problem with the hacking minigame in BioShock 1. But since it was the same hacking minigame for every single device, and you're hacking so many things all throughout the game, it's just something I kind of turned my brain off. It was something that I just became, it was just falling into the back of my head, and I really was not thinking about again after the first, hour of doing it. And that's definitely, I think, a bit of an issue when you're basically turning your brain off for massive chunks of time. Also, just really kind of blows my mind that there'd be instances where you do hacking in BioShock 1. It was just physically impossible to do from the beginning. BioShock 2 is really great. It's still a quick minigame. It's still just a simple minigame. It's still the same, you do the same minigame for every single thing, but it's so much quicker. And it does, when you do it in BioShock 1, everything freezes around you. It's like pausing the game, and you go into this weird minigame. There could be people fighting all around you, people shooting at you, and everything just stops dead in its tracks while you hack this machine. And it's definitely, it's a video game, and a lot of people would argue that it's a video game, so it's okay. With so much of the philosophy going into BioShock 1 was to try to make it feel like as natural as experience as possible. It definitely is a bit odd and out of place that they would do that. And I also realized that once I played the hacking minigame in BioShock 2, how much more I liked the way they did it, where the hacking is going on while everything else is going on. While you're hacking, people could still be shooting at you. If you have activated a robot alarm system and the robots are coming at you, the drones are coming at you to shoot at you and kill you, they are shooting at you while you're still trying to hack the machine. It's great because it just adds the tension and the stress of trying to get the hacking going on while fighting for your life or staying alive or ducking and dodging out of cover. It just adds so much more tension to the active hacking. I loved the way they did the hacking in the minigame. They also, with the system that they did, they added an option to make it so you actually get extra benefits for successfully hacking in certain ways by, hitting harder targets or being more efficient with your hacking. You get extra penalties if at the other end you can still fail, but you get extra penalties if you're not paying attention. And of course, they also added the option for projectile hacking, which I absolutely love. It was so nice not having to worry about rushing over. You could do it from a distance at all times if you had the ammo for it. But hacking was drastically improved in the second BioShock game. BioShock 2 minigames upgraded for sure. Absolutely. Was there any other minigames besides The hacking, because I don't think there necessarily was. That's the only one I can think of. Sidetrack and confused. That's why I got this. For these discussions, I go through and I type the whole thing. So I've got notes to go along with for the discussion. So we'll be good. I would not be able to just do this off the top of my head. I mean, I guess I could technically do a discussion off the top of my head, but it would not be able to go to the extent that I do for these. So, besides the hacking minigame, they upgraded the melee in this game, in which you don't need, it's not designated to one specific weapon. Just another one of those things where totally fine in BioShock 1, but after playing BioShock 2, I would have a lot of trouble going back and playing BioShock 1 now, with having to switch back to the wrench every single time I want to melee. Having a dedicated melee button seems so obvious. And they implemented a BioShock 2, and I'm so glad that they did. What's up, Virus? The camera functionality. So, camera in BioShock 1 was fine. And the actual, the function of the camera was great. I really like the idea of photographing your enemies to get to research them and analyze them, in which you can find out weak points and improves your character and how you do in combat with them. I really, really like that a lot, but it definitely is a bit strange where you're supposed to pull out... Hold on. I got DMCA'd last time, so we're going to do this last just in case. If there's any vocals, we're going to skip over sound music. It seems definitely a bit odd where you're supposed to stop in the middle of combat, pull out a non-damaging weapon, and research the subject to get research on them, and then go back to killing them. I guess there is the argument where it's supposed to be you don't have to research enemies. You're not required to do it. You could move on without... You could play through the entire game without researching a single enemy. And it's more of a risk versus reward situation where you have to stop what you're doing, put yourself at risk, and photograph the opponents to get the extra benefit to make them easier down the line. There's definitely a merit to that, but I much prefer the system that they do in BioShock 2, where it's instead of it's a simple snapshot, it's not a picture, it is a film. You're videoing, you're recording the opponents as they're doing what they're doing. And it also... It encourages you get more benefits, you get more research points out of using multiple different weapons. So it will encourage other people to use different weapons. I think it could have been done a little bit better. The way the system is set up, it basically encourages individuals to, what I did, shoot someone with one weapon, cycle to the next weapon, shoot them with that weapon, move to the next weapon, shoot them with that, and so on and so forth. Definitely doesn't seem as natural or as organic. To me, it kind of just reminded me of the fact that it is a score system going on as opposed to a research system. The logic behind it is sound, where, you know, you hit them with different weapons, they respond differently, and that itself is new valuable information to get more points. But I think it would have been better if, I think the better system would have been... if you attack the opponent and you damage them with shotguns, you start getting research points, and eventually once you do X amount of damage with shotguns, you no longer... It's diminishing returns. The more damage you do with a certain weapon, you get diminishing returns on research. And so you would maybe, with a certain enemy, focus on just shooting them with shotgun until you max it out. Then the next time you fight them, you're focusing on just using, your rivet gun, and the next one you're just using drill. I think it would have been a little more... natural and feel more organic and with sticking with certain weapons instead of just cycling through every weapon for more points. But it also would have encouraged players to use the other weapons, and in certain situations be like, oh, since I've used the weapon in this scenario, I realize now it does this, or it's really effective at this, now I use it more as a result. So definitely better than the first system, but felt a little bit gamey, I guess, in the new system they did for BioShock 2. The weapon upgrade system was also... Oh, I loved it. So much better in this game compared to the first game. What's up, Enox? The weapon system is great because it definitely has a lot of its token upgrades where, you know, you just increase your ammo capacity, you increase your damage. And that's how it was in BioShock 1, but that was pretty much all it was in BioShock 1. There were the occasional outliers where you would shoot the grenade launcher, and there was a passive ability or an upgrade ability where the explosions don't hurt you. where you basically don't take splash damage from your own grenades, which is great, but that was really the outlying example. It was the exception, not the rule, when it came to the upgrades, whereas Bioshock 2 leans more heavily into the more unique upgrades, and it's awesome. They basically, every weapon has 3 upgrades. The 2 upgrades tend to be, you know, the more simple, more token, increase in damage or increase in ammo capacity. But once you have those 2 upgrades, then you get an option for a third one. And the third one is much more unique, where they give different elemental effects, like the shotgun blast can make it so it actually electrocutes enemies. They have the rivet gun, where when you shoot enemies, it could set them on fire occasionally. But then they get into more obscure or unique ones, like they have the drill that makes it so when you're revving up the drill, it actually deflects any bullets back where you're looking at, which is so unique. And then they also have the machine gun, which the bullets actually will ricochet off of walls to get extra hits on enemies. So the weapon upgrade system was so much better than Bioshock 1. It wasn't just typical, you know, basic increased damage, increased ammo capacity. It was more unique secondary effects that weren't as obvious and were a little more creative, and also felt more fun in terms of getting upgrades for weapons. I remember when I got the drill, and I started actually using the drill more, and I saw the upgrade for the deflector bullets, I just got so excited, as opposed to just, you know, making it so it was more efficient with the fuel, which is, you know, still nice, but I was much more excited for the deflecting bullets because it was such a unique property. So the gene tonics in Bioshock 2 were also reworked, and for the better, in my opinion. Super pleased with the upgrade effects overall. The changes to the guns looks, yep, absolutely, way better. Pretty much a direct upgrade over Bioshock 1 in every way. So the gene tonics in Bioshock 2 were reworked too, and I remember when I saw it, and I thought, I'm not sure I'm a fan of this. I feel like this is going to be just like busted or dumb. So in Bioshock 1, the gene tonics were their passive abilities, basically. So you have plasmids, which were your methods of direct attack. You would have, you know, your fire plasmid, you'd have your electric plasmid, your ice plasmid, your bee plasmid. These are things that you would shoot out of your hands to attack the enemies directly, or, you know, you had the cyclone plasmid, where you place a cyclone on the ground and an enemy walk on it, it would spring them up in the air. These were direct things you would activate when you so chose. Gene tonics were something that were passive when activated. They would always be running in the background, and they were broken down into different categories like combat, engineering, and physical. Each of these categories only had 6 slots for them, so you can only put 6 slots, 6 gene tonics in the combat, 6 in the engineering, and so on and so forth. And once you had a tonic that would fit into one of those categories, if you really wanted it, you would have to replace one of your active slots with it if your slots were maxed out. And the big issue with this, because they were breaking it down to categories, and they felt that they had to they had to give more options. I think they were focusing on the quantity over the quality, because they wanted to give more options. There was a lot of the tonics that kind of layered on top of each other in terms of their benefits to each other. So they overlapped in basically functionality. So you'd have Safecracker 2, and you'd have Hacking Expert 2. Safecracker 2 made it so when you were hacking a safe, you would have 4 less alarm tiles. Well, in the hacking minigame, there are little tiles that if the minigame that you're doing, if the water runs through a certain pipe, it automatically fails state, and it activates the alarm. If you have Safecracker 2, it makes it so 4 of those alarm tiles don't appear, and then if you have Hacking Expert 2, it makes it so no matter what you're hacking, I think 4 of those tiles don't appear. So you could layer those 2 on top of each other, and it would basically have the same effect. Yes, one is more specialized for safe specifically, whereas one is much more generalized, but it basically made it so there was just a lot of overlap for other people. And there's definitely benefits to that. Someone could go for a build where specifically anytime they go after a safe or they encounter a safe, they don't have to worry. They can just breeze right through it. But I think there's more benefit to having more varied tonics as opposed to just filling in sheer number for options in a certain category. They reworked it in Bioshock 2, so now instead of having a set amount of slots for certain categories, you could have the tonics weren't categorized. There was 18 slots whole entire. You could, if you wanted to, you can make it so you can have 18 tonics that were focused specifically on hacking, or 18 tonics specifically focused on combat. It was completely up to you. And I remember thinking that this seemed completely busted. This was going to be a problem. And it ended up not being a problem. It was fantastic. It allowed them, I feel like it made them, since they weren't boxed into making sure that they had to keep it in certain categories, or making sure that they didn't give too many options in one category and less in others. It made it so they felt much more balanced and much more varied with what you could do for tonics. And it's also great because it gives the player more control for what kind of playstyle they want to go to. Maybe they want to make a playstyle where they're not very combat focused. They're more about hacking and distance-based things. So distance-based combat. So maybe they avoid combat entirely as much as they can, try to loot certain locations or hack robots to make it so they do all the fighting, or hack into safes so they can find more minigun turrets and things like that. And they could have all 18 gene tonic slots filled up with ones that are focused on engineering and tonics and none for combat. It's seemed very odd at first, and it seemed almost lazy, but it was a great way to lean more into the RPG combat and add it to the replayability, where players could choose the kind of play style that they were going for and get the kind of experience that they wanted out of the game by letting the player equip what they want. Before, it kind of just felt like an arbitrary video game limitation where they have to have 6 in this slot, 6 in this, 6 in this, as opposed to just basically injecting whatever the hell you wanted. Also, they made you more pick and choose your upgrades by having less power to the people than the upgrade station. Oh, that's right. That is something to bring up about the weapons upgrade system. In the original BioShock, they had just enough weapon upgrade stations to get every single weapon upgraded. Whereas BioShock 2, I think they made it so there was like 6 less or 4 less or something like that. So if there, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but if there's, say, 30 upgrades that you can do throughout the game, they only put like 25 power to the people stations in the game, to make it so that you wouldn't be able to upgrade certain weapons. And originally I liked the idea that it creates a certain type of scarcity, but I feel like when it's at the point where it's like, say, 25 out of 30, you're basically upgrading every single weapon you're going to use and ignoring the ones you're not going to use. And at that point, it doesn't really have as much of an impact on the game. If they made it so there was 30 upgrade stations, there was only if there was 30 upgrades to choose from, and they only gave 15 upgrade stations, I feel like that would be much more impactful, where it's like, do you want to spread it out evenly so your arsenal is more evenly powered up, or do you want to just dump it into the weapons that you choose the most? They would also have to, at that point, let you know, hey, you only have 15 out of 30 upgrades that you can choose from. Choose wisely. But I think that would have been a better system than just a couple less, if that makes sense. So BioShock 1 made it so you can upgrade every weapon to max capacity, whereas BioShock 2 made it so that you could almost upgrade everything to max capacity. But again, most people are just going to not upgrade the weapons they don't use, so it doesn't really have as much of an impact. I like the idea originally, but in practice, I realized it wasn't much of a difference at all. There's 18 upgrades and 14 stations. So that basically means that since every weapon has 3 upgrades, that means there would be 1 weapon. If there was, for example, I never used the crossbow in the game. I just wasn't a huge fan of it. Also, it was incredibly difficult to reach on the 8 button or the 7 button. So I almost never used the crossbow, and so I never upgraded it. And that would basically mean that 1 weapon would not get its 3rd upgrade, which kind of sucks, but as a whole, it's not all that significant. But that's the equivalent. 1 weapon doesn't get entirely upgraded, 1 doesn't get the 3rd upgrade. Not as big an impact on the experience of the game, in my opinion. So in BioShock 1, you were able to carry 9 health kits and 9 Eve hypos. The health kits are obviously the things you use to restore your health. The Eve hypos are the things that you use to restore your Atom. And it was kind of absurd in hindsight, just the sheer amount you can carry. You can carry 9 of each, and most health kits would heal the default amount of health that you start out with almost entirely. And the Eve hypos would fill up your entire Eve, your Atom meter all the way. It just seemed kind of absurd that you would have so much healing at any given moment. And in BioShock 2, the game is littered with health kits all over the place and Eve hypos all over the place. So you're not exactly scrambling or fighting to try to get through to the next fight. But the big difference in this case is, since you can only have 5 per fight, it makes it so the more difficult fights are much more stressful. So when you're fighting the Little Sisters, or you're fighting other bouncers, before you could just keep mashing the B button, mashing your heal button, you would have nothing to worry about. Yeah, you'd be lower in supplies, but it really wasn't incredibly difficult to come across. Whereas this game, it's even easier to come across supplies, but for that immediate fight, that it just makes it so much more tense when you don't have a massive backlog of healing items to heal yourself from. So in the overall experience of the game, the less amount of the more restricted amount of healing that you got, or that you could carry on you at all time, didn't really matter as much because you could find more things in the overworld. But for the more tense fights, it made them much more intense for them. So very, very small change, but a very welcome one. This is another one of those decisions that seemed so obvious. I can't believe they didn't do it in BioShock 1. But it took them to go to BioShock 2 to do it. Finally, now you can have both the gun and your plasmid at the same time. You have two hands and you can use both of them. In BioShock 1, you could only use your weapon or your plasmid. You had to toggle between them. And it wasn't even too big of a deal because in order to toggle between them, it was literally one button press. You would, on controller, you press the right trigger to shoot your gun, the left trigger to shoot your plasmid. Basically, when you had your gun out, if you tap the left trigger, it would put your gun away and pull out your plasmid. You tap the left trigger again to shoot it. It was a probably half-second difference from, switching from your gun to your plasmid, and then, you immediately shoot afterwards. So it was a very minor thing. It wasn't very big, but it just made things a lot quicker. It made things a lot smoother. It still kind of blows my mind they didn't have an original. In the original, I wonder if that was a design decision, if it was an overlook or what. But it doesn't make you overpowered. It doesn't make you that much. It doesn't make the game that much easier by having access to both your weapon and your plasmid instantaneously to use at any point in time. Just a really, really nice quality of life change. What was your take since this is your first time playing BioShock 2? I'm actually glad you asked that, Mansion, because this is the first game in the series we're doing, in this Design by Play series that we're doing, where I'm actually playing a game for the first time. I played Metroid Prime 1, I played BioShock 1. This is the first time I played BioShock 2, and I also felt that since this discussion is going to be a little bit shorter compared to the other ones, I thought it'd be a great idea at the end to actually give my thoughts and opinions and critique about just my general opinions on the game. So I will go into at the end and break down my thoughts on it. The general idea is I liked it. I like BioShock 2. Is the very short answer. There'll be a longer answer afterwards, but I like BioShock 2. I enjoyed it. I would suggest it to other people. In the original BioShock, basically you would see the little sister being guarded by the Big Daddy. You would kill the Big Daddy and then go up to the little sister and either harvest or rescue her. It was that simple. You didn't even have to escort her back to her little hidey hole. She would run past splicers. They wouldn't pay her attention. You literally just had to take out the Big Daddy, and that was that. Your job was done. In this game, it's very, very different. You still have to kill the Big Daddy to protect the little sister, but then you basically kidnap the little sister, or rather adopt her. She's got Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know. She really jumps from one Big Daddy to the next with no issues or heartbreak whatsoever. You kill the Big Daddy, take the little sister, you adopt her, and then from there you need to find two bodies that are placed throughout the city where she will harvest the atom from the body, and at that point splicers will come and attack the little sister trying to obviously kidnap her, take her, and you're supposed to protect her during that time. This decision was made by the developers because they wanted to. They were trying to make the players bond with the little sister because it was something that you protected, that it was something that you worked to keep safe, that you would feel more of a connection to the little sister, and it would make it so you would possibly second guess your decision to harvest her, and you would try to go for the more the good option of rescuing her. Also, something different about this is, in the first BioShock, you're a human. You're someone who's walking through the city. Well, obviously, you are not the same as a splicer. Spoilers, little sisters don't see it that way. You're basically an individual coming up to them, and they have to assume that they're in danger, that you're going to kill them, because that's what every other splicer has done up until that point. So it's a little bit easier for other people to make the decision to harvest them because you're just filling the role that you're fulfilling their expectations they set for you. Whereas the Big Daddy in BioShock 2, they immediately trust you. They go up to you and they expect you to protect them. So it makes it so on top of hopefully bonding to the little sister, where you protected them and you don't want anything to go to any harm to come to them after you tried to protect them from any other harm. It's also the fact that they trust you and make you feel like more of an evil monster for harvesting them when they so willingly came up to you and expected you to keep them safe. Why is that? Oh, because that's the tablet. That's why it was going off. Something else I had to say on the subject as well. I just lost my train of thought. But, also, for me personally, just from my personal experience, I actually, well, the sections of protecting little sisters from the splicers got a little bit repetitive and tedious. I do love that the little sisters were on your back and going with you, because there'd be little moments where they would be narrating or giving their own thoughts about things. Like, you would kill a random splicer and they would talk about how they want to roast marshmallows. You would upgrade your weapon while they were on your back, and they would talk about how their daddy has all the best guns or the shiniest weapons and the shiniest toys and stuff like that. Really, actually, very, very cute stuff that kind of, that kind of buttered me up. It definitely built that kind of connection where they love you and they care about you, and you feel like your character has that kind of connection to you, because the little sisters truly do believe that they have that connection to your big daddy. So it was effective to me in some sense. Maybe not the actual act of protecting them from the splicers coming. It was kind of, it added more action sequences, but it was not something that directly built the relationship between the two. That was more their little quips that they said while on your back, and I loved it so much. Okay, save questions for later. No. Like, you can ask questions. If anyone has questions, feel free to ask. It's just that if I have an answer for it that I will be going over later in the discussion, I'll just let you know that we will be approaching that later. But yeah, if you guys have questions, feel free. This is meant to be a discussion. This is not strictly just a lecture. If you guys have any questions or want to give your 2 cents on certain topics and subjects, feel free to bring it up. I just, I have this thing structured in a certain way that, flows a little bit more naturally. So if you ask a question and I will be answering it later, usually it's because I'm going to be answering it with information that were brought up earlier in the discussion, stuff like that. Ooh, marshmallows, killing with fire, dancing, daddy, dancing. Oh, that's what that was. It was electricity. Oh, because they're shaking. That's actually really cute. Yeah. No, they have little, it's adorable. It's twisted. It's so dark, but I love it. It's the cutest thing ever. I love it. In this game, they do more with moral choices. It's not just simply harvesting or rescuing the little sisters. There are now other individuals that you will come across who you have the option of killing or sparing. We'll get more into that later in the discussion as well, because I kind of go down the list of the different options that you have. But it was no longer just simply harvesting or rescuing. The harvesting and rescuing was made a little bit more complex, or not as straightforward or as simple. They added more steps to it to try to make you second guess or have different opinions on it. But they also added other options for moral decisions, because it's not just the little sisters. There's other people that are, some of them are definitely more complex, some of them not as much. To the fights, we can use the plasma traps and such. What added another level of mechanics to fights? Are you talking about just Bioshock 2 in general? Oh, that's right. You know what? Actually, thank you for bringing up the plasmids thing. I meant to write this down. Oh, protecting the sisters. Gotcha. That's actually true. I never really thought about that. As opposed to most other fight sequences, battles, most of the time it's just kind of the roaming splicer that you would take out. Maybe there'd be a group of 2 or 3 splicers that you go into and you have to take out 2 or 3. But it was pretty straightforward stuff. You would basically get the jump on them. You would have the big daddy, who, while you could try to set up a little bit, I tried to do it sometimes, they move around, the big daddy and the little sister, so you can't exactly predict they're going to approach from certain locations. So the little sister is actually very unique in that aspect, and I never actually thought about that, where when you set the little sister down, she starts harvesting the atom. She's going to be sitting there harvesting the atom until she's done. And splicers will come and attack from all directions until she's done. So since you know where the location is going to be, you can actually use certain other items that you normally would not use. The trap bolts on the crossbow, you could use specifically in that scenario by setting them up around the little sister. The trap rivets, you could set those up around the little sister. The mini turret, the auto turret, sentry turret, you could set up around the little sister. You could use the cyclone trap to set them up on different choke points or walkways where splicers might come, and then also combine the plasmids with them. That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. The little sisters are a completely different way of combat, in where it's constant enemies coming from all direction, but you're the center target as opposed to you coming in and getting the jump on them. That's a good point. It's a completely different combat style, so different weapons get a better benefit than other ones did in most other ones. That's pretty cool. I wonder if that's why I didn't join as much, because while I did use the mini sentry turrets for the big sisters, I never really used them for the little sister fights. And I used trap rivets for the big daddies, but never really much for anything else. And I never used the trap bolts. Interesting. Good point. Something else I want to talk on. I forgot to write this down. I meant to come back and take a note of this, but the plasmid systems have been upgraded too. Not just the gene tonics, but the plasmids were upgraded, where they're no longer... Originally, they had, Lightning 1, Lightning 2, Lightning 3. They had Incinerate 1, Incinerate 2, Incinerate 3, Winter Blast 1, Winter Blast 2, Winter Blast 3. And all they would basically do would just be stronger effects. It would make it so the electricity would do more damage and keep them paralyzed longer. The fire would burn for longer and do more burn damage. The Winter Blast would make it so they were frozen for longer. Things like that. This game when you're getting upgraded versions of the plasmids, they have different varied effects. So the electricity ones, when you upgrade it, it does more damage, and it does paralyze them longer, but it also makes it so they can chain to other enemies. The fire one, when you get it maxed out, you can effectively turn your hand from just being a snap of the finger to set something on fire in front of you, to holding it, and your hand just turns into a straight-up flamethrower, just gushing out fire until you stop. The cyclone trap, you set it on the ground, but when you upgrade it, you can actually then combine other plasmids with it. So you set the cyclone trap on the ground and make it so that when you hit it with the electricity bolts, now anyone who steps on it gets launched in the air, but they also get electrified. The beehive one made it so eventually it can attack multiple enemies, but then eventually, when you upgrade it again, enemies that die to the bees then become hives. So any other splicers that come near that hive, that dead body, makes the bees come out and start attacking them. So it was, instead of, again, just like the weapon upgrade system before, that was much more token, where it just increased the damage or increased the ammo count. The plasmids were the same way. They would just, increase in damage or increase in duration slightly. This one added more unique attributes to those plasmids, and you can use them in different ways, which was awesome. Thank you for bringing that up. Because you tell the sister when to harvest, you have all the time to set up and traps and make things easier. Yep, when you're doing the little sister thing, it's not just once you reach a certain body, it's automatically, it starts the wave-based system. You see the body, you can set up the traps, then you drop the little sister down so you can basically fortify and protect your area before the waves come in. So that's pretty much all the things I can think of where they really updated or cleaned up previous mechanics, which was a lot. Actually, a lot. Hacking minigame reworked, dedicated melee button, camera function differently, weapon upgrades aren't as token, neither are the plasmid upgrades, gene tonics completely reworked, health kit and Eve hypo count changed, having weapon and plasmid at the same time, little sisters completely reworked, more moral choices. That's a lot of stuff that they managed to improve. Again, I really like BioShock 1. I did not have any major issues. I did not think while playing the game, God, this sucks. God, this is so tedious and cumbersome and inorganic feeling. I really wish they would change this. I really didn't have that feeling while playing BioShock 1, yet they still managed to take so many mechanics and clean them up and polish them and just vastly improve them in so many different ways. So while the game was basically an expansion of BioShock 1, which some people would say is lazy, clearly these people were very skilled because they were able to take a game that felt just fine and polish it to a beautiful sheen and shine by the end of it by improving so many different mechanics that exist in the first one that I never thought were problems in the first place. So now we'll start talking about the new things that BioShock 2 brought into the BioShock universe. So when you play BioShock 2, you were actually a Big Daddy this time around instead of just a regular human being walking around Rapture. And this would seem kind of minor, but it definitely, for me personally, mentally felt completely different. It could have been the fact that I played Bioshock 1, so I was more familiar with Rapture. I remember playing Bioshock 1 for the first time and being much more scared, much more nervous when going into the game, scared of every turn of anything being around me or surprising me or scaring me because I didn't know what to expect. And I didn't have that in Bioshock 2. It could have been because I was so familiar with Bioshock 1, but I also do personally think the fact that I was a Big Daddy mentally added to that. I think the fact that I was the knowledge of being this large hulking creature definitely made me feel more secure as a character walking through the hallways in some way. You go from being a regular human being taken into a city underwater, separated off from society, with these drug addicts who could shoot lightning from their hands, crawl on the ceilings, and have no motivation but to kill you. And you become this giant monster with a drill for a hand walking through the hallways. It definitely, for me, mentally played very different in how I played through the game. My experience is different for because of the main character, in my opinion. Even though you don't really see the character change aside from the weapon choices. Pretty much every weapon you pick up has a weight to it. Like, you can have a huge rivet gun, a giant drill, and a minigun. Yep, they actually talked about that while they were designing the game, that since you were a Big Daddy and you had a bigger stature and you had more strength and size, that you could have these larger weapons like that. You could have the drill, you could have the giant minigun and the giant river gun and stuff like that. So it's actually funny you say that, because that's what the developers were excited for as well when they decided they were going to do Big Daddy as a main character. So one of my favorite things that they introduced into Bioshock 2 was the ability to explore underwater in the suit. There are segments where you're traveling from building to building in the actually under the water in Rapture, but not in the actual buildings. You're not completely restricted to just being inside the buildings and seeing the actual ocean. You can venture out onto the ocean floor. And apparently this is a huge, heavily requested feature from the players in Bioshock 1. And the devs were excited to do that to give the players, what they wanted. They wanted to see the city from the outside. But the other big thing about it is it provides more downtime. You can't really, I guess you could have combat in the underwater area, but no one likes underwater levels in platformers. So I'm glad the devs realized that the underwater segments would be more for relaxing moments. But it's supposed to, it basically adds downtime. It's supposed to be a break away from the tension. In Bioshock 1, splicers are always spawning. They once you get to a certain point, they may not be entirely a threat, but you still always have to worry about the fact that there could be someone who could get the sneak up on you and get the jump on you and attack you, or turn the corner and they're right in your face, or anything else. Just constantly being aware that there could be someone else around at all points. Bioshock 2, by having these moments where you're underwater, it's basically the sigh of relief where you can just kind of have some downtime, go from one section to the next, and take a break from all the stress and the tension to calm yourself, but also to make it so that when you go back into those high tense moments, it's a larger contrast, and you definitely feel it more. The other huge thing that they introduced into Bioshock 2 was the Big Sisters. The Big Sisters are reoccurring foes that appear all throughout the game, that are, I feel like most people would consider probably the hardest encounter that you will, the hardest reoccurring encounter enemy that you will find throughout the game. And their designs stem from the Big Daddies, obviously, but also in how they moved and how they played. They're basically the mirror of the Big Daddy. The Big Daddies are these big, strong, slow, lumbering, placid monsters. They're huge bodies of muscle. They're terrifying, but they're so slow. They won't aggro you. You have to aggro them, or basically get in their space, the little sister. Even if they don't have a little sister, you can go right up to them and they won't do anything. They might shove you out of the way, but they're not aggressive creatures. Only when you attack the little sister, attack them, or don't give the space to the little sister will they attack you as a form of protection. Little sisters are thin, they're agile, they are mobile, they're fast, they're aggressive, and they're instigators. They jump all over the place. They jump up, an entire floor above you. They'll jump on staircases. They'll jump on walls, sometimes the ceiling. They will then dive at you. They use plasmids. They're very quick. They're extremely aggressive. They're instigators. They will go after you. You don't ever come across them. If they are coming, you are made well aware of it, because if they're coming, they're attacking you. And they're also formidable foes, and the game gives you the opportunity to prepare for the encounter. They're the opposite of big daddies, and they're scary creatures. It was Alex. The first moment underwater was an epic moment where the big sister just that was also, yeah, that's true. The first time you go underwater, I feel like a lot of people probably were kind of caught off guard by. I mean, I absolutely was caught off guard the first time the big sister shatters the window and you go underwater, because I was like, there's no way the glass is gonna break. This is Rapture. They can't have this massive puncture and destroy everything. So the fact that it happened for the first time the glass actually broke was definitely a big whoa moment, because I did not expect them to do that. But I also think a lot of people had a whoa moment for the first time playing, because they're like, oh, shoot, that's right. I'm in a Big Daddy suit. I can be underwater. So it was, the wow moment of, wow, this actually happened. But it was the wow moment of like, wait, I'm actually alive and I can move. This is great. Yeah, the little sisters, the screech is terrifying. Wait, really, Yoshi? Little sisters will drain Adam from random splices to heal themselves. I did not know that. Probably because of most times when I fought the little sisters, I really didn't see many splices around. But that's cool. I did not know they could drain Adam from splices to get themselves more health. That's so cool. So for the little for the big sisters, originally it was supposed to be just one singular enemy who you would fight multiple times, and they would keep coming back. Basically, you'd fight them, you beat them, and they'd run, and then they'd return. They decided, it was supposed to be in the ending of BioShock 1, in the good ending, when all of the little sisters leave with you to the surface. One of them basically, while the other sisters are fine, they adapt and they overcome, and they, have life on the surface. One of them can't. One of them constantly has memories of Rapture and can't get away from it. So she eventually returns to BioShock. To BioShock, she returns to Rapture, and she was going to become the big sister. Eventually, they decided to scrap this idea because they realized having a character that was important to the story, so you could not kill them, it removed the feeling of triumph when you beat them. For me personally, I also think that it kills all tension in a fight when you realize that you can't actually kill them because they have plot armor. It makes it so it's just like, oh great, we're gonna do this again. I know how this is gonna end. Yeah, I get some kind of reward, but it doesn't feel like I'm overcoming or doing better. It just kind of feels tedious or annoying that they keep coming back. Whereas if it's a different big sister, at least you have the idea, and you can tell yourself that maybe this big sister thinks she's better than the last one, that she can take you down even though the last one couldn't, and stuff like that. So it was supposed to be one singular big sister who you would fight over and over, and she was supposed to be one of the sisters for the previous game who went back to Rapture, but decided for gameplay purposes that it was best to scrap that idea. In this BioShock, they decided to deviate a little bit from the first BioShock, where the first BioShock there are a handful of characters who aren't spliced out. You have Andrew Ryan. I kind of want to say Atlas, but Atlas was definitely splicing, especially by the end. He was completely spliced out of his mind, but Atlas, I believe, was splicing in general. You have, I'm drawing a blank on her name, but she was the scientist who was in charge of the garden. In the rose garden, the tea garden, and she was not spliced out, but you don't even get to see her face to face. She dies before you get to talk to her face to face. You have Tenenbaum, but that's pretty much it. You have Andrew Ryan and Tenenbaum are the only characters I can think of who are truly not spliced out creatures and monsters. And Tenenbaum you only meet briefly, and Andrew Ryan you also only meet briefly. You don't really get to encounter many different characters who aren't spliced out in the game. It's pretty much all splicers, all these drugged out monsters. BioShock 2 decided that they were going to introduce more characters who were coherent individuals, who were level-headed, in their right minds, people you can interact with and talk with, and I love that they did that. They had, we'll get into more of the discussion of who they are and what they do very, very shortly. But it's nice that they made it so that the city didn't seem like it was complete and total disarray. That there were people who were in their right minds who were able to keep things going. And arguably one of my favorite things about BioShock 2 in the entire game was the section where you actually get to play through the world as the little sister. If you want to buy BioShock 2 for PC now, you can buy the entire BioShock collection on Steam. They have all 3 games remastered. It's a great series, Alex. It's so good. Alex claimed to never splice before he got near the end of the game. Really? Huh. I could have sworn he had done it at some point beforehand. I guess not. I didn't know that. He seemed really level-headed, but he is also a con man, so I don't know. The section where you got to see through the eyes of the little sister was beautiful because you have, I mean, the little sisters are still little girls. They're still like these, 10, 11-year-old girls. No, they're probably younger than that. They're probably like 8-year-old girls. Yet they go through Rapture and they see the destruction in the city, it's complete chaos, the monsters that these splicers have turned into, and you wonder how it is that they're always so cheery and happy. And then you have a segment in the game where you actually turn into a little sister. You take control of one and you see the world through their eyes, where it shows the city of Rapture as beautiful, covered in silk and fabrics, and splicers look like regular, happy individuals, very, very nicely dressed, prim and proper. And they contrast this beautifully by having segments where during the time as a little sister, you're supposed to gather parts of a big sister suit to take back to a character in the game. And as you approach these parts of the suit, it flashes back to reality and shows that the city is a mess. It's in ruin. It's what you see here. It's flooded. It's destruction. It's chaos. It's crumbling. It's falling apart. And it's really cool to see how the little sisters view the world as being this perfect utopia, essentially, an angelic type of city, really. It was awesome. Younger, even like 6 or 7. Audio log where he says he never touched the stuff, but he always have been. He could have been lying, but if he said he didn't touch the stuff, I guess I forgot about that audio log. Yeah, the section with the little sisters, where you're going through with them, is beautiful, and I still wonder if when you're doing the little sister segment, you have parts where it flashes back to reality and what the little sisters see, back and forth, and I always wonder if that's supposed to be you coming back to grips, and is it supposed to be what the player actually sees, where it flashes back to reality, that for a brief moment you're not seeing what the little sister's seeing, you're seeing what you normally see, or if that's just something for the game itself showing the player the contrast between the two. I'm curious. 5 to 10, wow. We're young. But that's as far as I could tell, as far as I could gather and remember. Those are the major major mechanics that BioShock 2 brought to the table from the original BioShock game. They definitely tweaked and cleaned up and improved more older mechanics than they did bring in new ones. So now that we've gotten past the major mechanics of the game, I think we can dive into the characters. Again, apologies in advance for this one. It's felt like for some of these characters, I don't know what it was. I feel like with BioShock 1, I feel like a lot of the characters had more direct connections to each other, and that had more significance to the overarching story and the themes that the games went with. Whereas with this game, a lot of the characters were basically just brainwashed. And so their motivations weren't as complex, and also didn't tie in as much to the overall theme of the story, because it was basically just the main villain, and that's that. I was trying to go over with some more information about the characters, but I realized it was, again, kind of just becoming basic, step-by-step what it was that they did in the game. So this part is not going to be as... I just don't think it's as interesting as it was in the original BioShock discussion, but that's mostly just because of the design of the game itself. So, for the first character we will discuss in the game, we're going to talk about the main antagonist, Sophia Lamb. So, Sophia Lamb is a psychiatrist who came from the surface world. God, I hope I'm right in psychiatrist. I wrote that down and I meant to double check that and confirm if it was psychiatrist, because I know there's like four other doctors with similar name. There's like therapists, psychiatrists, psychoanalysts, and stuff like that. I hope psychiatrist is the right word for this one. But she came down from the surface when people in Rapture were having trouble adjusting to life underwater. They specifically note people were struggling with the lack of daylight. So Andrew Ryan called down Sophia Lamb because she was apparently the best practitioner in her field when it came to this type of stuff. And he just wanted something to ease the masses and to quiet the rattling of the great chain, he said, to make sure everything. And she is a psychiatrist. Okay, good. I got that right. So even though Andrew Ryan didn't exactly believe in it, he was willing to just do anything he could to get people down to Rapture who could make sure Rapture could maintain itself and continue along. Sophia Lamb herself was pretty much the polar opposite to Andrew Ryan in her beliefs. Ryan was about the self. He was basically objectivism personified. Each individual needs to take care of themselves, even at the expense of others if need be. You need not care about anyone, only yourself. Lamb was all about collectivism, giving the group priority over the individual's priority, giving priority to the group over the individuals within it. Despite the fact they were polar up. Oh, sorry, I gotta get rid of this song again. Because again, don't want any copyright strikes. Despite the fact that they were polar opposites to each other, she was very similar to Ryan in that she was just as extreme with her beliefs as Ryan was. Andrew Ryan's motivation to preserve Rapture and what it stood for pushed him to betray one of his core principles, and he eventually removed free will from his people when he started losing control of the city and he had no other option and he was about to lose it. His core principle about free will, every man should make the choice that he so desires if he wants, he had to remove that in order to retain control of his city. He was willing to compromise what he stood for to have his vision be seen and preserved. Lamb's core philosophy, hers boiled down to the self is not important. It's about what's better for the collective. The problem with that is she had to force other people to adopt this viewpoint by indoctrinating them through brainwashing. She was pushing her individual view on the collective to make a change to what her individual self wanted. So just like Andrew Ryan completely betrayed what his main belief was, to retain his city, Lamb was basically in direct conflict to what her belief was because she wanted other people to agree to her belief and basically change the collective to her ideal, but then make it the collective in itself. So they were both completely extreme in what their beliefs were, despite the fact they were on complete opposite sides of the spectrum of it. Lamb herself could be argued she was even more extreme with her beliefs because when she had her child, she had it with the express motivation of just someone to educate. She removed maternal instincts as much as possible. She literally had the child as someone just so she could educate her beliefs onto and help to carry on her ideals. And then when Lamb discovered Jack and his whole brainwashing thing with the Would You Kindly, the main character from BioShock 1, she was very excited because she then realized she could take that same the same research, the same principles that was used to brainwash Jack and do that to her daughter, to remove Eleanor's sense of self, bringing her ideals to living form by basically making her the ideal utopian of the collective as one with no sense of self. So Sophia was willing to brainwash her daughter to remove her daughter's sense of self just to help bring Sophia's ideals to life, which I think I could argue as being a little bit more sinister and twisted than the stuff that Andrew Ryan did. Imagine bringing someone into this world and then realizing that you could just turn her into a vessel to personify your beliefs. Andrew Ryan and Sophia were just so polar opposites to each other. But the funny thing is they were literally just two sides of the same coin. They were so similar and so identical. Their viewpoints were just facing in opposite directions. But Sophia Lamb was a very interesting character. She was clearly meant to be the complete opposite of Ryan, whereas Ryan was all about the self and what would happen to the city, what would happen if someone like that was given control and created a city, and it eventually turned in on itself and started to collapse. Sophia Lamb was meant to be a city, was supposed to be the opposite of someone who cares about not themselves at all, but only was beneficial for the whole. What would happen if that same individual would get control of that same city that fell apart originally? So very interesting take on it. I think it would have been more interesting if they tried to go the way of her creating a new city, because we'll get into that discussion afterwards when I talk about my thoughts on the game as a whole, because I like Sophia's Lamb's as being an antagonist and a mere opposite to Andrew Ryan, but I think it could have been done in a different way. So moving on to the next character, that was the main antagonist, Sophia Lamb. We have Delta, Subject Delta. That is you, the main character. You are the first Big Daddy to successfully be paired to a little sister. You are the first successful, but the fourth attempt, which is why it's the Delta. This is the fourth one. Unfortunately, the previous three ended in death, but you are the one who survives. And what's different about you as a protagonist in this game is you actually have a goal. You have a motivation. Whereas BioShock 1, you're kind of just, you land in Rapture by accident. And you're kind of just going along for the ride as you're trying to figure out a way out of here and just going on to the next section, trying to cling to the next person who speaks to you, hoping that they can give you a way out of this place. And Johnny Topside. But Subject Delta is different in this game. Subject Delta, when he wakes up, he has a clear motivation. His goal is to get to Eleanor. He's supposed to get back to his little sister and try to save her so they can be together again. And no matter what gets in his way, nothing is going to stop him from getting to his little sister. Excuse me. The little sister that he's going to, the main motivation why he has to get to her is he clearly has a connection to her, but it's because in this game, because he was the first paired successful Big Daddy little sister, his heart will actually stop if they stay too far away from each other for a certain amount of time. So there's clearly some kind of emotional connection between the two because of how they're paired, but also a physical life or death connection between the two, where if he does not get there, he will die. The stakes are very real, and the motivation is very strong, as opposed to just kind of going along for the ride and self-preservation, hope you can, squeak on to the next area and manage to find a way to escape this place. I think, the twist, I don't know. I don't know which is better. I like BioShock 1 because I can understand and like the character of Delta more, but the twist in BioShock 1 was so fantastic. So it's really, you can't really compare the two as to which is better. They both have their own benefits. They have their own merits. I'm kind of glad that BioShock 2 did not try to follow up with a crazy twist to one-up what they did in BioShock 1 as well. This is one of those examples of BioShock 2 doing something different from BioShock 1, and it worked out perfectly. They did a great job with it. Also, another thing that's different about the protagonist in BioShock 2 is you were an existing character before the events that take place in BioShock 2. BioShock 1, you're a new person who just managed to make his way down to Rapture. So you don't have a repertoire, you don't have a build-up, you don't have a history or connection to a lot of the other characters, or any of the characters that you know of leading into BioShock 1. BioShock 2, you were a Big Daddy. You existed in the city, and because of that, you have a connection to the characters in the game. The beginning in the prologue of BioShock 2, your character is shot and killed right before New Year's, and you are brought back to life 10 years later after little sisters extract your atom from different bodies in Rapture and bring you back in a Vita chamber. But because you lived a life originally, you will encounter other characters who recognize you and know who you are, and there is a past history to you and those other characters, which adds something completely different that the original BioShock did not, and it works very well for most of the interactions, I would say, for BioShock 2, and I really liked it. But But of course, the most significant character that you do have a tie to in Bioshock 2 would be your little sister, who is Eleanor Lamb, who is Sophia Lamb's daughter. So Eleanor Lamb is the daughter of Sophia Lamb, and she is the little sister for Subject Delta. She's the one who, in the prologue, witnesses your character dying after he kills himself, and she's after your character is killed, Sophia Lamb takes Eleanor and deprograms her. She basically removes the little sister brainwashing influence on her, mostly successfully. However, she cannot remove the memory of the Big Daddy of your character from Eleanor's memories, and because of this connection, Eleanor can't stay away, so she actually gets the other little sisters to gather the atom all throughout Rapture, looking for strains of your DNA in your genetic code in the atom, and then takes it to a Vita Chamber. And she's actually the one who revives you in the Vita Chamber. Shot and killed. I should say that. In Bioshock 2, the prologue, you're shot and killed by yourself. You are hit with a plasmid that hypnotizes you, and under Sophia Lamb's control, she tells you to shoot yourself in the head, and you kill yourself. Definitely dark and twisted, definitely fucked up, and is traumatizing for Eleanor, but doesn't play a major part in the fact that how you died, because you still come back to life. That's all that really matters. But yes, Sophia Lamb hypnotizes you with a plasmid to kill yourself. But Eleanor still clearly has a very strong connection to you and brings you back to life through the little sisters and the Vita Chamber, and asks you to rescue her because she senses that things are going wrong, and things are getting very dark with her mother and what her mother wants to do with her. So Eleanor is a great tool in this game. I really, really like what they did with Eleanor. She's probably one of my favorite aspects of this entire game. Eleanor is a tool. She's a mechanic that shows the player the direct results of their actions. A lot of the times when games have, especially older games, would have, moral choices or results with it, a lot of it was, I feel like, based on endings. You would get different endings. But Eleanor was more, you would see it tangibly before you got to that point. So whenever you would kill an individual that you would come across with the moral choices, whether it be a little sister or one of the other individuals, or you would save them, depending on what choices you make, it makes it so Eleanor does different, it behaves differently. It gives you different endings, but they're also tied directly to Eleanor's behavior. So in the endings, does Eleanor kill her mom, or does she spare her? Does she save her? Does Eleanor, when she makes it to the surface, does she try to escape into society and become a part of it, or does she basically have desire to destroy it and shut it all down? Does Eleanor take you with her? Does she bring you as kind of like a father figure that comes with her to watch over her and give her advice, or does she go on her own, or does she take you with the express motivation of using your more negative aspects to fuel her negative aspects and her more selfish motivations? So those are the endings, and they're much more varied and much more nuanced than I feel like most other endings in games. But it's also, the entire last chapter plays different in very minor ways. So depending on what it is that you chose for killing and saving, Eleanor behaves differently. In the last chapter, Eleanor fights alongside you as you fight splicers and other characters. You can call for her almost at any time, and she'll fight by your side. But depending on your actions, how she speaks during these fights varies and changes. And a lot of them are much more minor, little kind of smaller details, but they can get pretty dark. So in certain combat exchanges, if you are a character who saves a lot of individuals, she will kill someone and she'll just say, who's next? Just going on to the next. Whereas if you are someone who chose to kill, harvest all those sisters and kill everyone that you saw, when you are in that final chapter and Eleanor's fighting alongside you and she kills a splicer, she has a potential to say, eyes open now, I want to watch you slip away. So as opposed to be like, okay, the splicer's down, I'm going to go to the next, does anyone want to fight me? It's no, look me in the eyes. I want to see the life slip from it. Like really, really dark stuff. And this is all directly as a result of the player's actions, which I thought was fantastic. I love Eleanor being used as a tool to show and reflect the player's choices, whether they are, someone who's more altruistic and willing to spare other people, or you're someone who's willing to shut down, kill anyone who ever did any wrong, or, it's mostly for your own benefit. Eleanor is basically like a real life daughter where she watches the actions of her parents and those actions mold her. Eleanor changes drastically based on whatever actions the player themselves take out, and it's so cool. I love it. Eleanor was awesome. So going into the other characters, one of the first and going into the moral choices again, one of the first characters that you have a moral choice with that's not just Little Sister is Grace Holloway. So Grace is a woman who gets custody of Eleanor when Sophia Lamb gets arrested. Sophia gets arrested early on, before the events of the game, by Andrew Ryan. And so Grace is the one who takes custody of Eleanor. And shortly after Holloway gets custody of Eleanor, Eleanor disappears. She vanishes. And sometime later, Holloway, while walking through Rapture, comes across you, Subject Delta, and Eleanor, the little sister, paired together. And horrified, Holloway tries to take back Eleanor, in which case, obviously, we're the big daddy, so we respond by hitting Holloway and breaking Holloway's jaw. This created some deep-rooted hatred that Grace had for the Subject Delta. And because of this, when you go into, I think it's Pauper's Drop, the location that Grace is located in, Grace sees this and sicks the Rapture family, which is Sophia Lamb's group of people that she had, the splicers that Sophia Lamb has control over. Grace basically sicks the Rapture family on Delta, on you, to try to kill you because of this vendetta that she holds against you. Eventually, once you make it to Grace, you have the choice of either killing her or sparing her. Do you kill Grace because she, holds this vendetta and tried to kill you and sick the Rapture family on you? Or do you let her live because her anger and her motivations were misplaced? You weren't, a malicious individual. You didn't kidnap Eleanor. You weren't this monster who took her and was trying to shut down and kill Grace at the first opportunity you saw. Eleanor was forced to be part of an experiment alongside with you, and you don't have full control of your actions or your motivations. And so you were just basically doing your basic protection that you would do. It was nothing malicious, nothing with foul intent. It was basically a misunderstanding. Do you spare her because she does not realize this? This is very different from the decisions that we have with the Little Sisters. The Little Sisters are simple harvest or rescue. Just in the name themselves, they are much more cut and dry and more black and white. Whereas this one, it's more nuanced. The Little Sisters is about your own benefit or saving someone else. Whereas the choice with Grace Holloway is, do you basically forgive based on her actions, or do you take vengeance now that you have the opportunity? Very, very different from the Little Sister moral choices. But then we also have Stanley Poole. He is another character who we encounter, who's one of the other characters who's not spliced out. And he's someone we do get another moral choice to choose with him. So with Stanley Poole, Andrew Ryan and Sophia Lamb started butting heads in private when she was brought down to Rapture, and eventually they started butting heads in public through public debates, where she was basically mopping the floor with Andrew Ryan. So Andrew Ryan hires a reporter to get dirt on Sophia Lamb, hoping that he can find evidence that gives him enough that he can arrest her. So Stanley Poole is that reporter who ends up getting hired. And Stanley infiltrates the Rapture family and gets the dirt that he needs while he's there to give to Ryan, and Sophia Lamb is arrested and taken away. Once Lamb is sent away, Stanley gets full access and control of Dionysus Park. Dionysus Park is this massive section of Rapture that Lamb had set up and created that is dedicated to art and culture and is meant to be a living example of her collectivist ideals. So Poole, with full control of Dionysus Park, runs it into the ground. He's throwing parties and blowing too much money on everything. And Eleanor actually calls him out on this. And Stanley, scared that Eleanor is picking up on the fact that he's a fraud, that he's, someone who infiltrated this specifically to shut everything down. He panics and he actually takes Eleanor, kidnaps her, and drops her off in a little sister orphanage. This is the time when, Grace was in charge of Eleanor, and this is the result. This is her disappearance that happens. Stanley gets nervous, takes her, and drops her off at the orphanage. And this actually, because Stanley does this leads to Eleanor becoming a little sister. Eventually, later, Sophia Lamb is able to get out of prison, and Stanley freaks out, worried that, there were other people that saw the initial confrontation that Stanley had with Eleanor, and was worried that people were going to rat to Sophia Lamb about what he did, and that Sophia would find out what happened to Eleanor and that Stanley was responsible. He decides the only thing that he can do is to flood all of Dionysus Park, just breaks a valve, and apparently the entire section of Rapture is just completely underwater, dead. Everyone inside, dead. It was the best way for him to cover his tracks. Eventually, as you play through the game, Subject Delta arrives after draining Dionysus Park to try to progress through to get to where Eleanor is. Because the area is drained, Little Sisters immediately start coming out and trying to harvest the atom in the area. Stanley Poole is nervous about this because obviously Little Sisters, they can see the memories of others with the use of the atom, and is nervous that one of these people that is getting the atom harvested from will be able to have this information go to Sophia Lamb, and he'll basically be caught and everything will come crashing down on him. So Stanley blocks your progress and says he will only let you through once you've gotten rid of the Little Sisters. You can either harvest them, arrest them, doesn't matter, as long as you've gotten rid of them. And once you do, you have the choice. The moral choice eventually pops up. Sorry for all that preamble and explanation to it. It's just, this is my favorite moral choice that you have in the game, so I wanted to give some more backstory to it. But after you get rid of the Little Sisters, you're ready to leave, and Sophia Lamb unlocks the way to Stanley and says that she knows what Stanley's done, and that it's up to Subject Delta whether he wants to kill Stanley or not. So it becomes a choice of, do you kill Stanley or not? And it's basically the choice of, do you kill Stanley because, he killed tons of innocent people. He was a liar. He was a mole. He was greedy. He destroyed all of Dionysus Park. But most importantly, he also, he took Eleanor and dropped her off in a Little Sister orphanage, kidnapped her, dropped her off, and she turned into a Little Sister. She became something that she never wanted to be, that many people would consider a monster. So do you kill him because of the monster he is and what he has done, or do you let him go because, for one thing, Lamb has forgiven him. It's up to you to decide. But the big thing for me was, if it were not for Stanley, we would not have Eleanor. If it were not for Stanley's decision and everything that he had done, Eleanor would not have been the one to be dropped off into Rapture, into the Little Sister orphanage. She would not have become our little sister, and she would not. We would not have this connection. We would not have this drive. We would not have this motivation. We would not have this person that we have such a strong relationship with. So it's like, clearly he did something wrong. He did something immoral. He did something terrible, and he should clearly be punished. But because of these actions that he took, you're the one who gets to, to benefit from it. It made your life better as a result. So what is the proper action here? And I thought that one was the best moral choice in the game, because I felt this one was the most gray. This one was the most arbitrary. And I don't think they necessarily even presented it like that. I don't think they presented they clearly tell you that Stanley is the reason why Eleanor gets dropped off and, she gets turned into a Little Sister. But I don't think they kind of shine the light on the fact that if it weren't for Stanley doing what he did, you would not have Eleanor. So I think it was such a gray area, and I think it was so beautifully done that I loved this whole moral decision on it. I really wish the others were as good as this one. It was great. I decided to kill him, by the way. So the last major character that you encounter, who you have a moral choice with, is Gilbert Alexander. So Gilbert is a man who he was a scientist in Rapture who further developed Dr. Suchong's work after Dr. Suchong was murdered. And Gilbert Alexander was the first one to successfully create a Big Daddy Little Sister bond. After the Civil War, Dr. Gill starts to work for Sophia Lamb, and she brainwashed him to follow her beliefs. Eventually, because of the brainwashing, Dr. Gilbert volunteers to be an experiment in the New Utopian Project. The idea behind this project was to inject Gill with massive amounts of Adam so that he could have all the memories and knowledge of all the people in Rapture, and then from that point be able to theoretically, mathematically make the best decisions for the collective instead of making a decision for one individual person. With the minds and knowledge of everyone in his head, any decision made, he would be able to realize how it would benefit everyone or how it would harm everyone. But unfortunately, this scientific test did not go over great, and it turned him into this large, grotesque monster. So leading up to your meeting with Gill, you find audio logs all throughout his workshop, his area, his building, where it was recordings of him before he was turned into this grotesque monster. And it was basically requesting whoever it is that finds these audio logs to kill him. That he knew he would become this grotesque monster he would basically want to die as a result of it. And once you finally face him, the monster he's become begs for his life, asking to not be murdered. And again, you have the moral choice. Do you kill him and honor the wish of the sane man who no longer exists, or do you spare his life and instead listen to the now existing creature before you begging for his life? This one was very odd for me. I've still not completely... I still have so many questions about the character of Gill himself and his motivations, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to the end of this. But this one was also a moral choice. Pretty simple. Basically, yeah. Do you honor the wishes of the men who his final wishes before he died, or do you listen to the creature that's before you begging for his life now? Now that we've gone past the characters, this is the part where I'd really talk about what about BioShock 2 was groundbreaking or influential, but there really isn't much to talk about in these regards because it's BioShock 2, it's BioShock 1, the expansion pack. It took BioShock 1, it cleaned it up and polished it in new areas, but if there was anything about BioShock 2 that's influential, it's probably something that's really actually influential in BioShock 1, and we should look at BioShock 1 instead. There was a handful of new things that was introduced to BioShock 2, but a lot of it was built off of things that existed in BioShock 1 again, and we would want to look back at BioShock 1. So unfortunately, in terms of the groundbreaking or influential stuff, there really isn't a whole lot to talk about here. So that's the full discussion. That was everything I can think to bring up about the final product of the game we had itself. So now that we talked about that, we could talk about the reception of the game. So now we have talked about the game, we talked about the characters, we talked about the development. We can now talk about what happened once the game came out and what the public perception of it is. Thank you, Clag. I actually was very happy when I figured I could just use freaking wallpaper engine. It works great. When BioShock 2 came out, it had very high praise. Metacritic, again, I probably should say this, for the discussion of the reception. While there's obviously more to the reception and opinion on a game than just a number score, I think the best way to generalize and talk about the overall reception of the game is to turn it into a just generic common number score. And so I decided to go with Metacritic. Metacritic, if you're not familiar, basically takes all of the major review sites, the major sources, and aggregates the score into one final score. Something important to note, it's not valid in this case, but still I think it's important to bring up. For games that either get a letter score or are not given a score at all, letter scores are converted into numbers and then thrown into the pile to be aggregated. But for games that don't actually give any kind of official review number or letter or anything like that, Apparently, people at Metacritic, the staff members, will go and read the review and try their best to give a number score tied to it. So it can be a little inaccurate. However, this game was released in 2010. Sites and reviewers didn't really start to give reviews without number scores until later. So for the time being of BioShock 2, the Metacritic score is a pretty good average aggregate of what the reception was. It's always something we'll have to consider for later games. Multiplayer was legit when it came out. I loved the multiplayer in this game. I absolutely loved it. I had so much fun, and I was really, really sad when I tried to boot up the multiplayer for BioShock 2 and got nowhere when I just finished playing the game. So the game came out and had very high praise. The Metacritic score for official reviewers was an 88, which is very good. It tied with 14 other games for 26th place in terms of all games in 2010. But this is a steep drop down from the other games we've done, where they were usually in the tops of all other games of the year, or all time even. BioShock 2 had a user score of 8.2, pretty much across the board. Xbox 360 version was rated 8.2. PlayStation 3 version was 8.2. The PC version was 8.1. Based on these reviews, it just gets nudged out of the top 2,500 games of all time in terms of user review scores. Really goes to show just how much of a drop what goes from BioShock 1 to BioShock 2. BioShock 1 was way more highly critically reviewed. I mean, 88 is still fantastic scores. Just not nearly as universal as the first one was. So, moving on from the actual the review scores, we're going to go to public reception. And the public reception of this game is the whole reason I decided to play this. BioShock 1 is widely beloved and regarded as a masterpiece. Infinite is discussed all of the time because of how divisive the game is for tons of different reasons. No one talks about BioShock 2 ever. No one talks about BioShock 2 being bad. Normally when I feel like in a game in a series like that, that's kind of ignored, especially because this isn't like a Final Fantasy kind of scenario. This isn't a Dragon Quest kind of scenario or a Pokemon kind of scenario where there's so many different spin-offs of so many games in the series. There's only 3 BioShocks, period. So the fact that one of the 3 games is completely ignored usually would amount to the game is just very bad, so no one wants to talk about it. But that's not even the case. It's just, God, it was such a weird oddity. When people usually talk about what their favorite BioShock game is, it's either BioShock 1 or BioShock Infinite, and it's also always they either take the first or the bottom slot. I actually shouldn't say that. It's usually Infinite either takes the favorite slot or the least favorite slot. It's either the favorite BioShock game or least favorite BioShock game. But it feels like BioShock 2 is always in the middle. No one has strong opinions on it either way. It was the best way I like to describe BioShock 2's existence is it's as if BioShock 2 was a fever dream that was had by about 15 people in the world at the same time, and only occasionally does one of those 15 people bring it up, and then the subject is quickly changed. Like, it's so odd. I don't entirely know why this is the case. I have a couple different ideas. I think the idea of BioShock 2 not being discussed or brought up is kind of a self-enforcing thing. No one talks about the game, so no one really goes to play it, and then those new people can't bring it up to talk about it themselves either. I think when someone brings up BioShock, it's always brought up to either play the first one or to play Infinite as one of those two because they tend to be people's favorites. But BioShock 1 is a starting point, and BioShock 2, you don't need to play BioShock 1, but it's going to greatly add to your experience when it comes to playing BioShock 2 if you play BioShock 1 first. Infinite can be played without having played either BioShock 1 or BioShock 2. I feel like if people are talking about a starting point, most reason why people want to start in BioShock 2 would be for wanting to play in Rapture. But at that point, if you're going to be playing, if you want to play a game set in Rapture, almost everyone's going to tell you to play in BioShock 1 because it is a better game. But also, it's the starting point of Rapture that explains it and kind of introduces you to the city so much better. And I say that generally because I have not played BioShock I mean, I played Bioshock 1, and that was my first entry. I didn't play Bioshock 2 for the first time as my first entry to the Bioshock series. So I wasn't really looking throughout the game to see if it would be a good introduction to the series. I wasn't looking at it through that lens. And I'm curious how Bioshock 2 would be as a first entry game. But I imagine Bioshock 1 would be vastly superior as an entry to the Bioshock series. But yeah, even though like Bioshock 2 was never brought up, it's like it still did critically well, both by official critics and by users who have played it. They still enjoyed it. It's such a weird anomaly. It's a game that's just never discussed. Was there talk about Bioshock 2? I didn't see most of the game, but from listening for a little bit, it sounds like it didn't really have much of an impact. It doesn't seem like it offers much else to the world other than being a Rapture origin story. So that's the thing, Nara. That's what I kind of like. That's kind of what I've been saying, is that like there is stuff to discuss about it, but I found that a lot of the time for certain parts of the discussion, it almost felt more like an IMDb kind of overview where I'm kind of just listing off basic information. Bioshock 2 is basically an expansion for Bioshock 1. It's a cleaned up version of it, and it's made it so it's made it a little bit difficult to discuss this game, but it's also kind of been like a nice test for myself to try to figure out ways to bring it to talk about. There is stuff to discuss with this game, but not nearly to the extent that that Bioshock 1 had or Metroid Prime had. So apart from the critic reception, we can look at the sales for Bioshock 2. And apparently Bioshock 2 sales were disappointing according to the publisher. The sales slowed down a lot sooner than they originally anticipated, and a year after launch, the sales total were about 3 million. At that same point, Bioshock 1 had sold 4 million. So Bioshock 2 sold 3 million in a year, and Bioshock 1 sold 4 million in about 3.5 years. So Bioshock 2 didn't sell that great because in that 1 year period, the publishers were expecting to have sold 5 million copies. By current present day, as much as possible, because it's so much harder to keep track of sales because no one reports anything anymore. According to VG Charts, the game has sold 3.75 million copies on console. But if you count the 1.59 million copies shipped on PC, then we could say that the total has reached 5.31 million copies sold. But if you also want to include the Bioshock Collection sales, then the console version of Bioshock 2 has sold 5.09 million copies. And then again, if we want to throw the PC shipped copies, Bioshock 2 will have sold 6.65 million copies. So they got there eventually. They basically got there eventually, but unfortunately, dang, even on just console, it's still never reached 4 million copies in sales on console. That's kind of crazy. Hi there, Trouble. Do you think Bioshock 2 would be condensed to being Bioshock 1 DLC? So that's the thing. Bioshock 2 is also shorter. Bioshock 2 is much shorter. I don't remember how long it took me to beat Bioshock 1, but Bioshock 2 took me like 12 hours to beat. And we didn't skip anything. We weren't rushing through anything. Bioshock 2 is definitely shorter. I would say it was almost like it could be like a $30 DLC. I could see Bioshock 2 basically being like a $30 DLC. In terms of how similar and how different the game is, and how much it builds upon Bioshock 1. By current day standards, I would consider Bioshock 2 like a $30 DLC, a big expansion pack. So, we talked about the critical reception, the sales, and we could discuss very briefly the sequels that came out as a result of it. Despite the fact Bioshock 2 didn't sell fantastically, 6 months after the release of Bioshock 2, Bioshock Infinite was announced. So I don't know if maybe initial sales were good and they greenlit a decision to do the sequel, or if they said, regardless, we still see potential in this and we're going to make another game in the series. I'm not entirely sure, but Bioshock Infinite was announced 6 months after the release of Bioshock 2, that it was in development, not fully announced, but in development. And then a couple years later, we ended up getting Bioshock Infinite, released February 26, 2013. And then as of right now, we found out in December of 2019, 2K announced that Bioshock, a fourth one, is being made, and it's underway at a new studio called Cloud Chamber. We still don't know much else about that, but we do know there's a fourth one in the works. And also Ken Levine, the person who was in charge of Bioshock 1 and Bioshock 3, is not taking part in it. I did not play the Bioshock 2 DLC. It's kind of difficult to decide to do DLC because the idea behind these discussions I want to have is the original release of the game, because I feel like while the DLC is important and can be impactful, I think most people tend to take away the main game's experience, and that's the thing that tends to stick with them longer. So it's going to be a case-by-case basis, but I feel like in most cases, when I'm playing through a game for the first time for these discussions, I won't be doing the DLC. And so, no, I've not played the Bioshock 2 DLCs yet, which I've heard they're great, but no, I've not played them. So, like Fire Emblem Revelation to the 2 main branches of Fates. As in, it's basically just a very large expansion to Fates. So we'll wrap up the actual discussion of Bioshock 2 by... We gotta change the subject. Forgot about that. Will I play them? Probably. I most likely will. But I don't have any plans to do it at this moment in time. Okay. So we have, what can we learn from Bioshock 2? Because there's definitely some stuff to learn from this game. Because while it was a huge game and a very, very wildly successful IP, it's fallen out of the minds of the average public and players, and it did not sell that well. So clearly something went wrong. But what did go wrong? I think one of the important lessons to learn is that when making a sequel to a game, find out why the previous game was such a success, but on a deeper level. Usually sequels are made because the previous one was successful or it did good and there was more to be made. There was more to build on. It's easy to look at the superficial elements of a predecessor game, like looking at the main character, the villain, the location that it takes place in, the obvious mechanics, and these more clear elements are definitely important. But most of the time, these elements are just a result of other less obvious decisions made earlier on that may be the reasons why people love these games so much. Just looking at the superficial elements can really hamper it. I'll explain that a little bit more in some of these next parts. Taking an existing formula and polishing it doesn't always guarantee success and growth. Bioshock 1's success heavily stems from its ingenuity and groundbreaking settings and mechanics. Bioshock's 2 devs focused more on expanding and polishing pre-existing mechanics instead of innovating, and I believe that held it back. So, you look at Bioshock 2, and I feel like the devs felt that in order for it to be successful like Bioshock 1 did, they needed the location. They needed it to be in Rapture. They needed to have all the same mechanics that exist in the first game. They needed to have, a villain that was very similar or comparable to the main villain in the original one, because Rapture's world, its setting, its location was very unique and people loved it and talked about it all the time. Andrew Ryan is such a memorable villain. So having someone who's the mere opposite of him in their extreme ways makes sense. Having the mechanics so pretty much cut and paste identical with some minor polishing kind of makes sense, because they don't want to deter a lot of the previous people who played their older games. So like, I kind of get why they were doing what they did, but at the same time, when they're just looking at the superficial things that made up Bioshock 1 and try to find those as core guiding outlines to make Bioshock 2, I think that actually held it back, because when you dig down deeper, the location, the villain, these were great moments, but they're not specifically because they were just who they were, but they were results of trying to create something new and unique and groundbreaking that hadn't been done before. And that, I think, is why people like Bioshock 1, but Bioshock 2 didn't do that. They just wanted to clean things up and make it better. And because of that, we learned that an IP does not determine a game's success. Just because Bioshock 2 was part of the Bioshock IP didn't guarantee immense success for the game. It sold worse than the game that came before it. If anything, following in the footsteps of another IP can actually harm it. If a game is coming out, if it's the game before it set extremely high standards for the public, if their first impressions and their first looks at the new game being made don't live up to those expectations or disappointing in some way, people can kind of write off the previous game as a one-time thing, that the game was only good that one time and it's not going to be able to follow up again. And if consumers have certain expectations for an IP that's already established by earlier games, if a game is too different, it can also cause damage and end up dead in the water. I mean, look at Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Despite the fact Banjo is so beloved and people love that IP because Nuts and Bolts was so drastically different, the game was pretty much dead in the water because it was so different. So, like, you can't make it a carbon copy from a surface level of what the previous game was, but you also can't make it too different. So the moral of the story is, don't make video games because you'll never make anyone happy. And get to this again. And the last thing that I think we can really learn from BioShock 2 is that just because there is lack of a conversation about a game does not mean it's bad. No one really talks about BioShock 2, and there's definitely more reason to talk. I think it's because there's more reason to talk about the other BioShock games than there is reasons to not talk about BioShock, if that makes sense. BioShock 2 was great, but BioShock 1 and BioShock 1 was definitely better, and BioShock Infinite has more unique things to bring to the table in terms of discussion. Basically, a new game can be a great game by the standard of the industry as a whole, but that same game can end up in the shadow of another fantastic game that came earlier out, so people kind of forget about it. It's not that the game necessarily is bad, it's just that the other games that kind of came out around it just overpower it, so no one ever has the motivation or the desire to talk about it because the other ones offer so much better discussion. Whew. But that's all I really have based on what I could research with BioShock 2. Completely different. Yep, pretty much Treble. It's kind of like in this middle zone, this dead zone in the middle in between good and bad. It's not as good as the other ones, so when the discussion comes up and they want to talk about the good things, they talk about the other game and a different game of the series instead that came out first. But it's not a bad game by any means, so when people start talking about want to talk about the negative aspects to it, if anything, Infinite's low points are probably worse than BioShock 2's low points, and so that gets the discussion when people try to talk about the negative parts too. So it's in this weird middle area. Revelations was a $20 DLC to Fates that was advertised as the true story, except it didn't offer anything new. Gameplay was actually worse, and nobody really talks about it than how bad it was. Did serve as an answer to many story questions that were posted by the main Fates game, but otherwise not good. So that's interesting. So I wonder if BioShock 2 was... well, I guess, no, it's not exactly... It's not a direct comparison, because you're saying that Revelations was generally considered bad by most people, whereas most people wouldn't consider this bad, just nothing new. So I feel like BioShock 2 could have benefited from being a $30 DLC. Pretty much an error. Pretty much. I'm actually, so now that we're done with the discussion of BioShock itself, I feel like something I kind of want to do is whenever I play a game for the first time in this series, I kind of want to just have a short time where I give my opinion and discussion and my thoughts on the game itself. Because I for quite a while, and still kind of want to be someone who does game reviews and game deconstructions, because I just love hearing myself talk. No, but I love giving my opinions on things. I like researching things and kind of putting it into words. And the problem is I've worked on videos to try to do that, but whenever I do end up doing it, I end up making the script legit 30 minutes long. And I don't have an issue with writing the script and recording that script. It then becomes making a 30-minute video, editing the video in the middle, that becomes the big issue. So hopefully by discussing my thoughts on the game in this kind of method, we'll scratch that itch. So I want to talk about my opinion. God damn it. Wow, opinion looks like it's spelled completely wrong in this font. So I guess I'll talk about my personal opinion on BioShock 2, and I like it. I like BioShock 2. There's some big O's. Yeah, that's the font. I really like BioShock 2. I think I would definitely suggest it to people who do like BioShock, the IP, who like the series. I would absolutely suggest playing BioShock 2. I think it's a great game. I think it just really lacked when it came to pushing new boundaries. It felt like BioShock 1, the expansion pack. There was nothing really new. They basically just expanded upon previous mechanics that already existed in the game. They added tons of quality of life features. The dual control for plasmids and guns was really fun. Remote hacking was really welcome. The rework to the hacking minigame, cleaner and easier tonic system. The way they reworked it was great. Like, they did a lot of stuff that cleaned it up and made it great, but they didn't try anything different. I really like the introduction of the underwater system. It really did bring the scale of the city. It made me have appreciation for the scale of the city. It was the part we got to retread through Siren Alley after it was flooded was friggin' gorgeous. Apparently there was a shark swimming through there, and I didn't notice it, and I'm really mad that I missed it. But there were some absolutely beautiful parts. I was really happy to see that they decided to dive into and explain what happens when the little sisters get older, how they get turned into big sisters. Originally, I was under the impression that they kind of like, they didn't age at all. They kind of just stayed that size, that it did something, whatever the slug did would halt the growth of their body and maybe like halt puberty or something, so they would stay that size forever. I was really interested to find out that they get older and grow up, and then they actually found a use for the little sisters when they do grow up, which I thought was pretty cool. When it comes to BioShock 2, like, I can't really talk too much about what I liked about BioShock 2 as much, because it kind of just is saying what I liked about BioShock 1 more again. So again, I want to reiterate, I liked BioShock 2. I thought it was great. I absolutely suggest it. But now we're kind of just going to talk about the things that I didn't like, because talking about all the good stuff and the things I did like would be basically talk about the things I liked about BioShock, which we've already done in the previous discussion. The atoms in the atoms in the underwater area were so good. Great way to reward exploration. Do you think that BioShock 2 suffered from being in the same setting? Like, if it was a different setting but kept the same gameplay mechanics from BioShock 1, would it be better? I mean, that's basically what Infinite did. And honestly, kind of to the detriment of Infinite. One of the biggest issues that people have with Infinite is that plasmids exist in Infinite. But why? Plasmids exist in BioShock because they are the direct result of Andrew Ryan creating the city where they lift all restrictions when it comes to scientific testing, where they don't have to worry about morals or codes of ethics and anything, so they can test things more rapidly. Because of that, they have much faster, much more rapid scientific advancements, and that's why we get plasmids as a result. Also, in the ocean, the slugs are found, which become the building base component for plasmids too. So it's a result of the environment and the people who go there and the political atmosphere that allows for the creation of plasmids. And then plasmids advance even more because they were just meant to be merely something that people could purchase. But then when war started to break out, civil war started to break out, it became an arms race to further development them and stuff like that. In BioShock Infinite, they're just kind of there. Plasmids just exist. Because people probably assume it's BioShock, so it's got to have plasmids. They're clearly not a very rare or expensive commodity because they're given away for free at a state park. And you don't really see anyone using them. You don't see anyone in public like using their incinerate to light their cigarette, at least from what I could tell. I'll keep an eye out for that when I do BioShock Infinite. But they basically added Infinite, they added plasmids to Infinite because that's what they thought BioShock was. So by setting it in a different setting and location but having the same mechanics doesn't necessarily work because it feels like it's shoehorned in, and that's part of the beauty of BioShock. It's not just something that's there existing because it's a fun mechanic. It's there because it required, it fit into the story and the world, but it also ended up being fun. So I would say not necessarily, because that's basically what Infinite is now. So going into the things that I was not as much of a fan with BioShock 2. I lost my space. Where'd it go? Okay. So I had a little bit of trouble with the story in Bioshock 2 because I felt like it wasn't nearly as easy to digest or understand as Bioshock 1 was. Now, I could be wrong on this because I know that I played Bioshock 1 when it came out. I played Bioshock, or I watched people play Bioshock. I have in the past just been interested and did some light researching into the story with Bioshock. So maybe it's because I did that research that it's more when I played through Bioshock 1 the other week, a couple weeks ago, because I already knew the story and had much better understanding, I was able to understand and piece together things as they were happening better. But for me personally in Bioshock 2, I had a lot of trouble with understanding and grasping the story. Normally what I do is when I play through a game for these discussions, I take the next day off from streaming and I spend the entire day researching. I just spend like 8 hours, 10 hours researching. And the first like 5 to 6 hours of it was just researching the story for Bioshock 2. I was crawling through the wiki, reading everyone's information, their motivations. I then went through and I watched a video that plays every single audio log. It was like a 2-hour video. Like, I spent a lot of time just finally truly understanding the story before I even dove in to try to do the regular research that I do for Bioshock. I think that's also part of the reason why this discussion wasn't nearly as good as the other ones in my opinion. But I just had a lot of trouble following the story. It didn't feel nearly as digestible compared to Bioshock 1. In Bioshock 2, I felt there were certain segments that didn't really have a lot of good build-up like other games did. So in Bioshock 1, the build-up to Simon was great. You are aware of this mad doctor, this plastic surgeon who starts to deteriorate mentally and has gone off the deep end. You are aware that there's clearly some stuff that has gone down in the medical pavilion, called the medical pavilion. It makes it more obvious that you might encounter him. There's ghosts, the ghosts that freak out and cry right outside his office and in other areas as well, showing the results of what he did. There's signs that advertise about him and show his madness even more. So the eventual lead up to what was Steinman's room and the fight with him was much more obvious. I knew that was coming. The build up with Cohen was fantastic. Sander Cohen, you speak to him one-on-one, so there's direct connections to him, so there's no mistaking who he is, where he is, or what his motivations are. You are running errands for him. He's preventing you from progressing through until you eventually make him happy and fulfill his needs so he can let you through the other area. Says he will let you go eventually. You get more backstory on him. You can there's a much more tangible build up to when he's going to appear by taking the photos and putting them there. You know that something's going to happen when you get the 4 photos. So the reveal for him felt much more natural and organic, and I expected that. I didn't even know I was fighting the Wales brothers in this game. Both of them. Not just one, but both of them. Daniel Wales, the first one you fight, I just turned the corner and saw a glowing dude. I was just in a regular like building, like a tenant building. All of a sudden I turned the corner, there's a glowing dude. I was like, oh, I guess I'll shoot him. And when I realized his health didn't go down much, I was like, oh, I guess this is a boss. I guess this is the guy I heard on the audio logs briefly. So I was just completely unaware. I mean, I kind of was familiar with Daniel Wales, but I didn't even know he was still alive in Rapture somewhere at the time, despite the fact they talk about in like 2 audio logs briefly before you fight him that he's technically alive and like running a brothel type of thing. So they have like lead ups to it, but it still wasn't very clear or obvious that the build up, the encounter with him was coming. So I felt really just blindsided by that. And I only realized that who I killed was Daniel Wells after he was dead. And I think I like looted his body and there was like an audio log or something like that on him. It was yeah, I was completely lost on that. And then with his brother, Father Wales, I didn't realize that I was fighting him either. I thought I basically entered into a room that looked like many other rooms in the game. And I thought I was just fighting a big group of splicers. That just happens occasionally because it was clearly a significant room, but I thought it was just a group of splicers. The only reason I knew that I was fighting Father Wales, this boss, was because he was clinging to a wall as a spider splicer. So he's far away. I can't exactly see him. He doesn't look much different than any other spider splicers, but especially when he's up far away on a wall, he doesn't look different at all. I realized we had killed everyone in the room, and there was one random splicer kind of hanging on the wall still. So I shot at him and realized that his health was the last little chunk. He was mostly dead. I guess the robots had taken care of almost all his health, but he was only had a little bit of health, and it took a lot more bullets to kill that, to take out that last chunk of health than expected. I was like, who the hell is this guy? And then I realized afterwards when I lose by, I was like, oh, this is Father Wales. There were 2 boss fights in this game. I had no idea with the build-up going to him who it was, or that the room I was going into was a boss fight. I felt like there was a lot of issues with build-up leading to major moments and major characters in this game compared to Bioshock 1. Bioshock 1 did it so much better. I also felt like Bioshock 2 was a lot more gamey in feeling than Bioshock 1. The majority of the reason why your progress is halted in Bioshock 2 is because you're going on the train, and then all of a sudden you have to make a stop because your entry is blocked off and you need to do some other token thing to get through. It happens constantly. You couldn't get for Fontaine Futuristics, you could not get into a major progression area because you try to play an audio log that it's a door that's blocked off by sound recognition. So you're supposed to play an audio log that plays a sound recognition file, and that would let you in the room. The reason why you can't get through is because Gil, in his crazed, spliced out way, tries to prevent you from getting in there by sending a drone over to talk over you so you can't get through. Makes sense. There's a way to stop it, but like, it's like any other drone you've encountered in the game, which you could shoot down and take out. Why couldn't you necessarily shoot this one and kill this one? It felt like a very arbitrary gamey thing to not let you through because this bot that's invincible is talking over you when trying to play an audio file. In order to get through, you have to go to 4 different robot shutdown stations and remove his device that he's inserted into them. And only then does his robot stop coming after when you try to open the door. But the thing is, other drones can still be deployed. So if other drones can still be deployed, why is it that his drone is no longer deployed? It was a really, really odd situation that felt like a very gamey, it felt like very much like a video game kind of roadblock set up in your way. The game had a lot of those. There was a couple odd plot holes that I tried researching and could not find answers to. Why is it that Gil left messages saying he wanted to die? Gil was brought into the Rapture family cult and brainwashed. Apparently he was brainwashed. He was susceptible to brainwashing because he felt bad for previous experiments he had done in the past and wanted to make up for what he did. And apparently he volunteered to be the subject of the test. If he was nervous about what would happen during the test, that he might die and he would want to be killed, why even volunteer in the first place? Why instead go through with the experiment and be okay with turning into this monster, but instead leave notes behind telling other people to kill him? It seems odd that he's brainwashed enough that wants to become a test subject for this test, but is not brainwashed enough that he realizes this is madness, but not smart enough to realize maybe I should just back out of this. Instead, I'm going to have other people kill me. So really kind of odd situation with him. I didn't find anything that really outright explains why Eleanor is able to communicate telepathically with the little sisters and also control them telepathically. And also why she was able to make a plasmid that allowed you to take control of the little sister. As far as I'm aware, I mean, I understand that the Eleanor was injected with Adam, and she has much more tolerance and control over Adam as a whole, but it's considering they had to do, there was so much research and testing that had to go into create any types of plasmids. It seems kind of odd that Eleanor was able to just create a plasmid on the spot that allowed you to take over control of a little sister for the perfect situation. Also kind of felt like a ex machina. He had relays on the bot shutdowns to boot the signal of his turrets, and you were destroying those relays, not pulling on the shutdown switch. I get that, but the point I'm saying is, why is it that he was why couldn't I destroy his robot? Even if he was send me another one, wouldn't I be able? It's literally 2 words to get the audio log to play off and open the door. It felt very gamey as an arbitrary block to get through. I don't know. Felt very odd. And I don't understand why they'd be relays, because they can boost the signal. They will indefinitely chase you, basically. I don't know. Just a weird part of the game. Another odd thing in the end of the game, you have the little sisters. You have Eleanor go with the little sisters in the water to boil the water, which is needed in order to equalize the pressure so that your escape sub can get away. It makes sense why Eleanor could go into the water. First, it's a little bit odd that apparently she's able to boil herself and boil the water around him, and also little sisters are able to do it. I can kind of buy Eleanor doing it because, again, she has more control over Adam and she could teleport and do lots of crazy stuff. So it makes sense she could boil the water. I don't understand why the little sisters were able to control it that way and do that. I mean, the little sisters are supposed to be defenseless creatures, basically, that the big daddies have to protect. So it seems odd that they can superheat themselves and then boil the water. But the other thing I have an issue with is Eleanor's in the little sister suit, or sorry, the big sister suit, so she can go in the water. So that makes sense. But why are the little sisters able to submerge themselves in the water completely and be just fine? I don't know. Thought that was odd as well. So something that I really loved about BioShock 2 was that kind of fell short in another way was I love the bond between Delta and Eleanor, and it culminates to a much stronger father-daughter bond by the end of the game, by the finale. What was originally just first the title of Big Daddy became much more literal by the end of the game as you fight for her protection and she does the same for you. You definitely have more of a connection that feels less like a title and more like it's actually fighting as a father and daughter protecting each other. You play as the daddy who you have a daughter and she watches your every move, and based on your actions and what she learns from you, it changes how she grows up and what she turns into and what she believes in life. I mean, there's all these different endings that tie on your relationship to her about either, you know, you're the daddy and you're a father who protected her and you have good judgment because of that, and she wants to keep you with her so you can whisper in her ear and help give her advice throughout her life and things like that. I love it so much, but the big issue is, why does Sophia Lamb's goals have no direct connection to this father-daughter theme? It feels like everything is building up to this like this is the finale. This is supposed to be the culmination of everything leading up to this end moment. Why is it that this theme of father-daughter bond so disconnected from Eleanor's from Sophia Lamb's goals and motivations? You know, Sophia Lamb has the Rapture family, which is kind of can be compared to the father-daughter bond being the family, but I don't think it can, because the Rapture family is literally just a title. It's a moniker to help. It's a tool to be used to help brainwash people to join her side of the cause, to brainwash the people for Rapture. And I've always said this, that if you ever have a job that refers to themselves as family, it's usually a sign you want to get the fuck out of there, because describing someone as family usually is used as a tool or a weapon against them. Sophia's goal is to turn Eleanor into a utopia personified by injecting her with Adam from People of Rapture, giving all their memories and their thoughts and viewpoints, and then brainwash that sense of self out of her so she can calculate the best decisions to benefit the greater good. What does this have to do with the father-daughter bond between the main what does that whole motivation have to do with the father-daughter bond between Eleanor and the main character? The only connection I can find between the two of them is Eleanor is something that both people want. Sophia Lamb wants Eleanor to be that personification of her utopia, to personify her ideals in life, whereas we want Eleanor because she's our daughter we're trying to protect. Also, we have this drive where if we don't have a close connection to her, if we're not near her, we die. So the only binding point I find between them is Eleanor. This is huge contrast to BioShock 1 and how they approach their story. Andrew Ryan's philosophies, his philosophies created and destroyed the City of Rapture. It was what allowed it to be created in the first place, and also, when unchecked, allowed it is the cause of Rapture's downfall and how it implodes on itself. His actions and ideals create the enemies in the city, who then took his son and warped him in to become an assassin meant to kill him. So Ryan's ideals create the city that ended up destroying himself, and also he had a son, but because his ideals created enemies that took that sun, that turned it into a weapon back against him. Which, again, the brainwashing that was used on Jack to kill Andrew Ryan wouldn't have existed, probably, to the extent that it was, if it weren't for Andrew Ryan creating a city that allowed for this unethical testing to go on in the first place. And again, in the end, Ryan still stood by his principles, and he chose to die instead of simply being murdered. So there's a really huge disconnect in how the story was so integral all throughout BioShock 1, with the starting, the ending, and the setting, whereas the protagonist and the antagonist, whereas it seems so all over the place in BioShock 2. Is there something hinted at the end where Delta is Eleanor's actual father? I don't know if I was reading into that. I don't think they ever outright say... I don't think they actually say who Eleanor's father is in the game. They might say something in like the comic books or whatever, but as far as I'm aware, there's no... I didn't see anything that said anything about Eleanor's actual father in when I was scrubbing through the wiki. I say scrubbing. I was reading pretty intently. So I had that issue. So the last thing I really wanted to talk about that really kind of bugged me with this game was Eleanor Lamb. And that something seemed really off about her that I wasn't a huge fan of. And it took a while to really put into words, and it's kind of specific. So instead, I basically wrote down this paragraph. I'm just going to read this word for word to you guys, because I think this is the best way I could word it. I had issues with Sophia Lamb. Sophia Lamb doesn't just live her life and just believe other people are wrong. She doesn't look down and feel pity for those who don't see life as she does, like Andrew Ryan does. She doesn't even attempt to explain her views in a way that could get you, the player, to see it from her perspective. She just sees the player as opposition and tries to make you feel guilty for what you've done. As someone who already had a viewpoint, one who opposes her, I just see her trying to guilt me as childish and immature. Something someone would do when losing control, so she resorts to calling me names. Sophia doesn't try to get in my head and manipulate me. She doesn't try to validate what she's doing in a way that might make me think about what I'm doing or why I'm trying to stop her and how maybe I'm looking at it all wrong. Which is literally what she does with everyone to get them into the Rapture family. I hear her audio logs, and she's so smart and manipulative with these people, but when interacting with me, she's just not complex or smart. She's a stubborn child who's going to do what she set out to do, and when she starts to lose control, she lashes out. I feel like everyone builds up Sophia Lamb as being this really smart, manipulative person who's going to always use her mind to win in any situation and convince the other person that they're wrong, and they're going to convince anyone to come to her side, whereas anytime I interacted with Eleanor, it was none of that. I felt like she wasn't ever trying to convince me. She would try to guilt me, but guilting doesn't work when I already have my set opinion, when I already view my opinion as what I'm doing is correct in this situation, as opposed being the opposite viewpoint to Sophia Lamb. Guilting isn't going to do anything to me, and I felt like that was her go-to card in most cases. How we're taking Eleanor from the people of the city, or we're infecting Eleanor with her sense of self and free will and desire to make choices. I'm like, none of this is guilting me. You use the word infect as if what I'm doing is bad and I'm a virus on these other people, but I don't think it's an infection. What would be more effective is if she managed to give examples or try to convince me that what I was doing is bad, instead of just saying what I'm doing is bad, you know? It wasn't actually trying to change my viewpoint or try to make me view things different. It was, this is your viewpoint that you're sticking with, and I'm going to say you're a bad person for thinking that. I'm going to call you mean names. So it was really unfortunate. I heard the audio logs and how she was able to manipulate the warden, how she was able to talk to random individuals and get them to hate Ryan because they followed in his footsteps and tried to be just like him, that they cut their hair like him, so the guy shaved his head the next day, that the warden, she wrapped the warden's head back around himself, where he realized that he was letting his guard down so other people would jump him just so he had the excuse to punish them and stuff like that. There was a lot of clever techniques that she did to get in the heads of the other people in Rapture, but she never did any of that in BioShock with me directly as the player. And I understand it's harder to do that with a playable character, because their motivation is going to be different than just, you know, a static character in the game. But still, it felt so disappointing when she was built up as such a clever manipulator, but when talking to me, she just seemed like a child, an immature child. throwing a tantrum because her plan wasn't going the way she planned it to. What's up, Moses? So this all sounds like nitpicks, and but it makes it sound like I dislike the game. It makes it sound much worse than it actually is, but I enjoyed the game very much. BioShock 2 is just such a huge game, following up BioShock 1. And BioShock 1 had a huge emphasis on story, and BioShock 2 tried to follow up with it. And when when a video game puts its emphasis on story, it's really easy to make mistakes and mess stuff up. And most of the gripes that I had with the game is mostly tied to the story. Like I said, the actual player experience is fantastic. The gunplay, the movement, the amount of options and choices, the fact that you can change your play style in so many different ways, like the settings, the locations, the downtime, the new characters, the new enemies, like it's all great. It's definitely, a very polished version of BioShock 1, but the thing is, it's mostly BioShock 1. It's taking BioShock 1 and expanding upon it and polishing it. I would absolutely suggest this game to other people who are fans of BioShock series and like story-driven games and who like the BioShock IP. But having played through the game, I now understand why it is that BioShock 1, that BioShock 2 just doesn't really get discussed. It's sandwiched between two huge games, one that was landmark, groundbreaking, hugely influential, one that was different from BioShock 1 and tried new things. Some of them worked, some of them did not, but there's a lot more room for discussion and debate and varying opinions on it, whereas BioShock 2 is literally BioShock 1 just polished mechanically and story-wise much more problematic in terms of consistency and delivery. I think that's all my thoughts on the matter of BioShock 2 itself. Is there anyone else who has any other things that they want to bring up? Anything else that they want to talk about regarding BioShock 2? Or the series itself? Yes, exactly. Thoughts. Exactly what I was going for. BioShock 2, good, pretty much. Yeah, best way to sum it up. Oh wow, this is bugging me. How long has that been there? Oh, there we go. Screw that up. I guess that's pretty much it. I don't really have much else to talk about on the subject. Like I said, we went through everything. I will be playing BioShock Infinite eventually, where we will have the discussion for it, just like we did with this. But I need to take a little bit of a break from BioShock. I have played BioShock 1, did tons of research on BioShock 1, had discussion on BioShock 1, then played BioShock 2, had a ton of research on BioShock 2, and then had a discussion on BioShock 2, back to back. I need just a smidge of a break from BioShock. I love BioShock. I'm excited to do Infinite. I am very excited to find out what my thoughts are on the game now, but I'm going to take a little bit of a break from it. The next game I will be playing is Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. This should be interesting because I think part of the reason why BioShock 2 is a little bit harder to have a discussion on is because it's a controversial game and it doesn't have immediately really great things and immediately really bad things. When these things are so polar in their my opinions for it, it's a lot easier to draw points of examples for discussion for it. Whereas when they're kind of middling or in the middle, it becomes a little bit harder to pick out certain things to discuss and talk about. So that's what BioShock 2 was. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is the same thing. It is going to be an in the middle kind of game. It's also going to be a little bit different because I'm going to have to try to figure out how I want to do this in the future, where BioShock and BioShock 2, they are sequels. So it's going to be difficult to discuss about the game itself entirely and not relying on talking about the predecessors in this series. So while talking about Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, it is going to be difficult to talk about the game just itself without bringing up Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. But I'll see what we can do about that. It's just going to take some time. It's going to take some time to figure out the best way to to get the discussions for the in the middle, the polarizing types of games. And it just so happens, I guess a lot of them are multiple games in the series. I don't know. We'll see. But next game will be Banjo Nuts and Bolts. We will be starting Banjo Nuts and Bolts tomorrow on stream. And then we'll have a discussion afterwards. Trying to think if there's anything else to bring up or talk about. Not really. I mean, yeah, thank you, Lone P, for posting the link for the discussion. There is, if you're watching on YouTube, there is a link in the discussion that talks about, that takes you to the page that links, that lists all of the games I plan on playing for the future discussion series. If you're watching on Twitch, you can just click on it in the chat, and you can see the games I plan on playing. And if you think there is a game that's missing that I should play, you can click on that, and you can suggest a game, and I will consider putting it on the list too. Might do Dark Souls 2. Not sure. I think I might do Dark Souls 2. We'll see. But yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of the discussion. Hopefully there will be more people in the future to continue furthering discussion, because that's my main goal with this, is to educate and to discuss things. Because, I mean, Bogsy brought up something earlier that I completely did not think about with the changes of the tonic system. So the more people that take part in these, the better. That's what I want more than anything else. And hopefully I will see you for the next discussion, or I will see you for the next video. You guys are great. See ya.